In the corner, a 6-year-old girl is burning up from the heat. Her mother hasn't eaten in 2 days and chews on thin air when she thinks no one is watching. The firewood will run out the day after tomorrow, and the boy who's been saddled with this dying body knows something the whole village doesn't. He's already lived once, and he knows how to find food where others only die. The cold gnaws at his bones from the inside. Park Raeon opens his eyes and sees blackened straw above his head. His body won't obey him. His arms are thin. His ribs stick out from under his shirt like a stray dog's. He sits up and the walls blur. In his past life, he was 34. He was a survival instructor. He taught special forces how to set snares and build shelters out of nothing. And now he sits in the body of a 12-year-old boy and listens to a 6-year-old girl choking on a cough in the corner. Memories of this body surface in fragments. Mother, Park Raeon. Sister, Min-soo. His father was crushed by a pine tree 6 months ago while logging. The village of Tool, the edge of the Haegyeong Peninsula, and beyond the threshold of the house lies the forbidden forest of Cheonggrim. Raeon breathes steadily and counts. Firewood for 2 days. The girl in the corner is burning up. Mother gave her porridge to the children and kept nothing for herself. He stands up. His legs tremble, but hold him up. An axe stands by the door, old and chipped, but still usable. His father's boots are nearby, huge and full of holes. He slips them on, and his feet sink inside, but it's better than walking barefoot in the snow. His mother jumps up and grabs him by the shoulder. She screams that he mustn't go into the forest, that the forest is cursed, that his father went there and never came back. Raeon looks up at her. His body is small, but his gaze is not. He says he'll be back by sunset, with food, and that something in his voice stops her. Not the voice of a boy, the voice of a man who knows what he's doing. He steps outside and the cold hits his face. A dozen crooked houses, snow up to his knees, not a single wisp of smoke except for their chimney. People here are just waiting to die, not living. And ahead lies the forest. The trees lose their tops in gray sky, trunks 3 arms width around. The shadows between the roots stir even in the daytime. Any normal person would turn back. Raeon strides forward. He isn't afraid of the forest. He's afraid of what will happen if he doesn't go in. Min-soo coughs up blood. His mother's ribs show through her dress. There is no choice. His legs sink up to his thighs. The axe presses against his child's hand, but his eyes work. He crouches by an old fir tree and reads the snow. A hare's track, fresh, an hour ago. He follows it 20 steps and finds a path, trodden down. Animals pass through here every day. He pulls a scrap of rope from the porch, and his fingers remember on their own. A loop, a knot, a stopper, a flexible branch bent into a spring, a peg driven into the ground. In a past life, he used to tie this in 40 seconds in front of cadets. Now it takes 2 minutes. And the moment he tightens the last knot, the rope under his fingers feels different. Not physically. He feels that the loop holds tighter than this rotten twine is capable of. Something in the forest responds to his work. He freezes. The silence around him is not empty. It is attentive, as if someone huge and very old is watching him and waiting to see what he will do next. And this is where the strangest part begins. He ties 4 more loops, the same thing every time, tighter, more secure, better than it needs to be. He goes deeper, finds a pheasant roost by the feathers and droppings, builds a trap out of sticks and stones. By noon, he checks the snares, 3 hares out of 5. In a normal forest, 1 snare out of 5 is already good luck. Here, it's 3. His hands shake with hunger. The boy's body demands food right now. He endures. On the way back, he removes a large red pheasant with a green sheen from the trap. By the stream, a wild leek bush pokes out from under the snow. In December, onions don't grow in winter. He looks at the bush. He looks at the forest. He tears off a full handful and stuffs it into his shirt. By sunset, he emerges from the thicket. His mother stands in the doorway, white as a wall. She's been standing there all day. Raeon silently drops his catch at her feet. 3 hares, a pheasant, a bunch of green onions. Yoon-hee can't get a word out. Old Cho, a former hunter with a broken leg, limps over from the neighboring house. He takes the noose and twists it between his fingers. He says no one here makes a knot like that. He asks where the boy learned it. Ryan shrugs. His father showed him. He just remembered. Choi is silent. Then he turns to the neighbors, who are already huddling against the fences, and says that Park Raeon is cooking meat today, and whoever can should bring firewood. That evening, Min-soo eats his fill for the first time in a month. He gnaws on a rabbit leg with both hands. His cheeks turn pink. His mother eats for the first time in 3 days, too. Neighbors sit around the hearth. Widow Pei and her sons. Grandpa Ho, who hasn't left the house since fall. They eat silently and greedily, and for now, no one asks how a 12-year-old boy returned from Chongrim alive and with a catch. For now. Rayon stares at the fire and continues his calculations. Tomorrow the meat will run out. In a week, the firewood will run out. He needs a system, fixed trails, fixed traps, and he needs to understand what force in this forest makes his snares tighter and his traps more successful. But that's tomorrow. Today, Minsu is eating meat. Today, his mother isn't crying. Today is enough. Rayon woke up before dawn. His body ached from yesterday's trek. His leg muscles burned. His shoulders throbbed from the weight of the bundle. 12 years old. The body of a 12-year-old malnourished boy. He sat down on the floor and looked at his hands. The calluses from yesterday's axe work had already swollen into blisters. In his past life, his palms had been like the soles. Here, the skin was as thin as paper. He'd have to get used to it. Minsu was sleeping next to her mother. She was breathing heavily, but more evenly than yesterday. Her cheeks were slightly pink. The meat had done its job, but one dinner wasn't enough. She needed to eat like that every day. Fatty, hot meat, broth, greens, if he could find any. Rayon put on his father's boots and went out. His mother hadn't woken up, or she was pretending not to. A dry branch lay on the threshold, thick, birch, perfect for kindling. It hadn't been there yesterday. Rayon picked up the branch and looked toward the forest. A wall of trees stood black against the gray dawn sky, quiet, alert. He nodded. He didn't know to whom. He just nodded and walked on. The second day in Chongrim was different from the first. Rayon followed his own footsteps from yesterday and noticed what he'd missed in his haste. The forest was enormous. The trees soared 30 to 40 meters high. Their trunks were covered in moss as thick as a palm. It was dark among the roots even in the daytime. But the darkness wasn't hostile. He could feel it. Not just, but something deeper. As if the forest were deciding to let him in or not. Yesterday it let him in. Today it let him in again. Rayon checked the snares. 2 out of 5 had worked. 2 hairs. He removed the catch and moved the empty snares to new trails. Then he went further, deeper than yesterday. And here, for the first time, he felt what he would later call reading the forest. He stood at a fork in the animal trail and looked at the ground. 2 tracks. Both bore. One old, 3 days old. The other was fresh from the night before. He had known this before. In his past life, he had taught cadets to determine the age of a track by its depth and the sharpness of its edges. But here it was different. He saw more. The trampled moss on the left lay differently than on the right, and the difference told him not just the direction, but the distance. The beast had gone northwest-west, about 2 hours ago. A large one, a male, limping on its left hind leg. Rayon blinked. How did he know that? Moss can't tell you that much, but he knew, as if someone had highlighted details that the eye sees but the brain usually misses. He didn't go after the boar. It's too early. His body is too weak for such a kill. Even a wounded boar is dangerous for a healthy man. For a 12-year-old boy, it's death. But he remembered the direction, and he continued on his way. By noon, he had 4 hares and a partridge, and something even more important than the game. He found a clearing, a small one, about 20 meters across, flat, sheltered from the wind by the trunks of old fir trees, a stream 30 paces away. Rayon stood in the middle of the clearing and didn't see the grass beneath the snow. He saw a smokehouse, here, by the stream, a shed for butchering over there by the pine trees, a fire pit in the center, drying racks along the edge of the clearing. This spot was perfect, but that was a long way off. First, he had to survive. He returned to the village an hour before sunset. His mother was waiting, this time not on the doorstep, but by the window. She saw him and quickly turned away, pretending she hadn't been waiting. Rayon laid out his catch on the table. 4 hares, a partridge. His mother looked at it, her lips trembling. She asked how he did it. Rayon replied that the forest was kind if you knew where to look. Yunhee shook her head. She said the forest had never been kind, that it had taken her father, that the old folks say Chongrim takes more than it gives. Rayon said nothing. He couldn't explain to his mother that the forest hadn't taken her father. Her father had been killed by a pine tree during logging. Just a job, just a death. The forest had nothing to do with it. But to the villagers, it made no difference. Everything bad came from Cheongrim. Always. That evening, Cho came. He sat down by the stove. He was silent for a long time. Then he pulled a bundle from his bosom. He unwrapped the cloth. A hunting knife, short and wide, with a bone handle. Rayon recognized it from his boyhood memories, his father's knife. Cho had been hiding it for 6 months. He said that a father's knife should belong to his son, that if the boy really knew how to go into the woods, he needed a good knife, not that rusty stump hanging in the porch. Rayon took the knife. The handle fit his palm like a glove, a small palm, a child's, but his grip was firm. Cho looked at him, and there was something strange in the old man's eyes. Not surprise, recognition, as if he saw someone else in this boy. He said that Rayon's father had held a knife that way too, with both hands, the blade away from him, just as they were taught in the old hunting estates before the Baron took everything over. Rayon nodded and thanked him. Cho left. His mother put Minsu to bed. The girl fell asleep quickly, her belly full, her body warm, her cough quieter than yesterday. Rayon sat by the fire and sharpened his father's knife on a stone. A steady sound. Grind, grind, grind. His mother sat down beside him, silently. Then she said quietly that he had changed, that before Minsu's illness he had been a different boy, quiet, timid. He cried at night after his father's death, and now he was different. Rayon didn't turn his head. He kept sharpening the knife. He said he'd just grown up, that when his sister was sick at home, he had to be strong. Yoon-hee placed her hand on the top of his head, a warm hand, heavy. She said he was just like his father. Rayon clenched his teeth and continued sharpening. Something hot rose in his throat. This boy, the real Park Raeon, the 12-year-old kid who cried at night and was afraid of the forest. He's gone. In his place is a grown man who doesn't even know how to properly mourn someone else's childhood. But his mother is nearby, and the knife is in his hand, and it needs to be sharpened. On the morning of the 3rd day, he went out earlier than usual. It was dark, the snow crunched, his breath was steam. A dry branch lay on the threshold again. This time, there was a mushroom next to it, dried, white. Those are expensive at the market. Rayon put the mushroom in his pocket and went into the forest. He began his systematic work. The first 5 loops were on the tried and true trails. Today he added 5 more, expanded the area, found a new hare trail by the western stream, discovered a fox den. He didn't touch the fox. Foxes eat mice. Mice eat grain in the barns. Foxes are useful. Let it live. By the 4th day, he had a map, not on paper, in his head. Every trail, every watering hole, every burrow. He knew where the hares went in the morning and where in the evening. He knew where the partridges spent the night. He knew where that lame boar lay. The forest revealed all this to him bit by bit, detail by detail, like a teacher who doesn't give the answer but leads the student to it. By the end of the first week, Rayon was bringing home a steady haul, at least 2 hares a day, sometimes 3, sometimes a bird on top of that. Once he found a badger's burrow and caught a badger in a trap. His mother melted the badger fat in a pot. She rubbed Minsu's chest and back with it. That night, the girl slept without coughing for the first time in 2 months. The village took notice. Smoke rose from the Pak family's chimney every day. The smell of meat, the smell of life. Neighbors came by, first for coal, then for advice. Widow Pei asked if her eldest son could go into the woods with Rayon. The boy was a year older, healthy, but cowardly. Rayon looked at the boy. He stood behind his mother and averted his eyes. Rayon told him to come at dawn tomorrow, in boots and with a rope. By the end of the first week, Park Raeon was no longer the strange boy who went into the cursed forest. He had become the one who fed them, and in a starving village on the brink of winter, the one who feeds others is entitled to respect, even if he is 12 years old. The boy's name was Pei Dong-ho, 13 years old, broad-shouldered but scrawny. His mother fed him better than the others because Pei's widow secretly traded in dried fish. Dong-ho came at dawn as ordered, in boots, with a rope, and with a face as if he were walking to his own funeral. Rayon looked at him and said nothing. He turned and walked toward the forest. Dong-ho trudged after him. For the first 100 meters in Cheongrim, the boy walked normally. At 200, he began to look back. At 300 meters, he stopped. Rayon turned around. Dong-ho stood there pale, clutching the rope with both hands. He said he couldn't go any further. that the forest was watching. Rayon nodded. He said that the forest was indeed watching. But watching and threatening are two different things. He walked up to the nearest tree and placed his palm on the bark. He stood there for a moment. Then he told Dong-ho to do the same. The boy approached it as if it were a scorching stove. He touched the trunk with his fingertips. Nothing happened. The bark was just bark, cold and rough. Rayon said the tree had stood there for 300 years. It had seen hundreds of hunters. It wasn't an enemy. It was just a tree. You shouldn't be afraid of the forest. You should be afraid of your own stupidity. Not looking where you're going, not hearing the crackling. Don't miss the tracks. That's what kills you in the woods. Not a curse, but carelessness. Dong-ho swallowed and pulled his hand away from the tree. The fear hadn't left his eyes, but something else had appeared alongside it. Curiosity. They walked to the first line of snares. Rayon showed him how to check them, how to remove the catch without damaging the hide, how to reposition the snare if the trail had shifted. Dong-ho watched intently. His hands were shaking, but he was memorizing it all. Rayon let him set the snare himself. The first attempt failed. The knot was weak. The spring was flimsy. The second was better. The third was almost right. Rayon adjusted one knot and nodded. It'll do. And at that moment, he felt again what he had felt on the first day. Warmth in his fingers. The snare under his hand grew stronger, but not just his noose. The knot Dong-ho had tied also tightened. Just a little, barely noticeable, as if the forest had accepted the student's work because the teacher was standing nearby. Rayon remembered this. On the way back, Dong-ho was carrying 2 hairs, one from Rayon's snare, the other from his own. That very third one he had set himself. The boy looked at the hair and couldn't believe it. He said it was his first catch in his life. Rayon replied that it was the first, but not the last. So we can do it again at dawn tomorrow. Dong-ho nodded so hard his head nearly flew off. That evening, Widow Pei brought a pot of porridge and 3 eggs to the Park family's house. She bowed to Rayon's mother and said that her boy had smiled for the first time in a year when he came home. The next day, another one arrived. The blacksmith Kim's youngest son, a skinny, angry 14-year-old boy named Kim Jun-ho. The blacksmith had sent him with orders to obey or face the belt. Jun-ho disobeyed. He argued. He did things his own way. He set the snare backwards. Rayon didn't yell. He didn't scold him. He simply took apart the boy's snare and placed his own next to it. In the morning, a hair was sitting in Rayon's snare. Nothing was in Jun-ho's snare. The boy looked at both of them. He blushed. He rearranged his to match the example. On the third day, his snare caught a hair too. Jun-ho brought the catch to his father. Blacksmith Kim came to see Rayon that evening, a huge man with hands like shovels. He stood in the doorway, crumpling his hat. He said that if the boy needed a newer axe, he'd forge one. For a hair, in a week. Rayon agreed. His first barter. His first deal. The first brick in the wall he was building. By the end of the second week, Rayon had 3 apprentices, Dong-ho, Jun-ho, and a quiet boy named Taegu from a house on the edge of the village. Taegu didn't speak. At all. Mute from birth. But his hands were golden. He wove baskets from vines, and his baskets were the best in the village. Rayon showed him how to weave a pheasant trap. Taegu watched once and repeated it. Perfectly. Rayon looked at the trap and, for the first time in 2 weeks in this new world, smiled genuinely. The scent of the gift of transmission was strongest here. The box Taegu wove after Rayon's instruction held its shape as if it had been made by a master with 20 years of experience. The forest accepted apprentices through their teachers. In the middle of the 3rd week, what Rayon had been waiting for and fearing happened. Baron Sun's messenger arrived, on horseback, wearing a warm, fur-lined cloak. The horse was well-fed and content, so was the messenger, a round-faced man with a greasy smile. He rode into the village and stopped at the village headman's house. He spoke with the village headman. Then he went from house to house. He reached the Pak family's home. Rayon was in the forest at the time. His mother received the steward alone. He spoke politely. He asked about the hunt, how many hides, how much meat. His mother answered tersely. The steward smiled and nodded. Then he said that the Baron was glad to hear that there was a hunter in Toul again, that the Baron had always supported the hunting trade. that according to county law, half of the forest trophies belonged to the landowner, that is, to Baron's son. His mother remained silent. The steward placed 3 copper coins on the table. He said it was in advance, for good relations, and that he would stop by in a week for the first batch of hides. When Rayon returned, his mother told him everything. 3 coins lay on the table. Rayon picked one up and turned it over in his fingers. Copper, thin. With 3 such coins you could buy a handful of flour at the town market. The Baron was offering a handful of flour for a week's worth of hides and meat. Rayon put the coin back. He looked at his mother. He said there would be no hides for the Baron. Yunhee turned pale. She said that wasn't right, that the Baron owned the land, that the law was on his side, that if they refused, they wouldn't come with coins, but with sticks. Rayon nodded. He knew, but it was winter now. The roads were covered in snow. The Baron is far away. Rayon has time. Not much, but he has some. He gave the coins back to his mother and told her to hide them. Don't spend them or give them back. Let them sit there. They'll come in handy later. He stepped out onto the porch and looked at the forest. Chongrim stood dark and silent. Rayon gripped the handle of his father's knife. The village is fed. The boys are learning. Minsu breathes easier, but the Baron already knows. The clock is ticking. Rayon didn't wait. The day after the steward's visit, he gathered 3 boys and led them into the forest, not to hunt, but to work. They needed a stockade. Not against beasts, against people. He chose dry pine trees 200 meters from the village. He showed them how to fell a tree properly. Cut from the bottom, cut from the top. A wedge, the direction of the fall. Donho and Junho worked with axes. Tegu chopped off the branches. Rayon marked the length. 2 meters for each stake. Sharpen the bottom. Burn the tip over a fire so it wouldn't rot. On the first day they piled up 20 stakes. Not enough. Rayon needed at least 100 to fence in even just the 3 nearest houses. In the evening, he sat by the fire and counted. 100 stakes, 3 days to prepare them, 2 days to set them up. If the weather holds, if the boys don't give out. Minsu sat down next to him and rested her head on his knee. She was warm. Her forehead wasn't burning. The cough was still there, but it was dry, not a deep one. The badger fat was helping. She asked what he was building. Rayon said a fence, a big one, a sturdy one, to keep the wolves out. Minsu nodded seriously and said she wanted to help too. Rayon stroked her head and replied that she had more important work to do, to get better. That's her older brother's order. Minsu laughed, the first time in all the time he'd known her in this world. A quiet, hoarse chuckle, but laughter nonetheless. Yunhee stood by the stove and watched them, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Not a bitter one, a warm one. The next morning, Rayon left for the forest earlier than usual. The boys were still asleep. He needed to check the deep snares and a few other things. He headed northwest, to where he'd seen the tracks of a lame boar a week ago. His reading of the forest guided him precisely. Trampled moss, bark stripped away at the level of the boar's shoulder, droppings from 2 days ago. The beast had been circling. It hadn't gone far. Rayon found its lair. The boar lay beneath an uprooted old spruce, huge, fangs as long as a palm. Its hide was dark, almost black. A swamp boar. Rayon knew about them from the boy's memories. Swamp boars are larger than ordinary ones. Their meat is tough but nutritious, and the bone is prized by alchemists and craftsmen. They make amulets and handles out of it. This one was wounded. Its left hind leg was swollen. Most likely it had run into something, or gotten caught in someone else's trap and broken free. The beast was dangerous, even wounded. Rayon crouched down 40 meters away and watched. He thought. In his past life, he would have taken one down with a rifle without a second thought. There's no rifle here. There's a knife and an axe, and a child's body. A direct attack is out of the question, but he needs this boar, not for food, for what comes next. A marsh boar's bone is worth enough at the market to keep the village going for a month. The hide is expensive too, and there's enough meat to feed all of Tula for a week. Rayon began digging a trap pit. He found a spot on the trail between the resting place and the watering hole. The boar goes to drink at the stream every day, so it will pass by here. Digging the frozen ground with a child's hands was hell. He worked for 4 hours. He chopped at the roots with an axe. He cut through the turf with a knife. He shoveled out the dirt with his hands. The pit turned out to be shallow, just over a meter deep. Not enough for a regular bore, but at the bottom he placed sharpened stakes. Not to kill it, to trap it. He covered it with branches and sprinkled snow on top. He laid out fir branches around the edges to hide the smell of fresh earth. Then he stepped back and assessed his work. Not good enough. The boar could jump over it, or go around it. He needed to narrow the path. He piled branches on the sides, created a corridor, not a wall, just an inconvenience. It's easier for the beast to go straight than to force its way through the barricade. The craftsman's hand. He could feel it. The stakes in the pit were sharper than he'd sharpened them. The branches lay tighter than he'd laid them. The camouflage seemed perfect, though he knew he'd worked roughly. The forest helped, just a little. Raeon returned to the village by lunchtime. The boys were already working. They were driving stakes into the ground without him. Donho was in charge. Junho cursed but obeyed. Taegu silently hewned. Raeon looked at them and felt something akin to pride. 3 weeks ago, they had been frightened children. Now they were a work crew, uncoordinated, clumsy, but a work crew. By evening, he began erecting a stockade. He drove stakes into the frozen ground. Hard work. Blacksmith Kim came out of the smithy, looked, and silently picked up a sledgehammer. He began driving them in. Raeon marked the spots. Kim struck. The work went twice as fast. Then, Old Man Ho came out, old and lame, but his hands were strong. He began to bind the stakes with vines for sturdiness. Taegu showed him a tighter weave. Grandpa grunted and adopted it. By the end of the day, 30 meters of palisade stood. The pack house, the Cho house, the Widow Pei's house, 3 yards behind a single wall. That night, Raeon didn't sleep. He lay there and listened. The forest rustled beyond the village, wind in the treetops, a distant howl, shadow wolves. They howled every night, but closer this past week. He knew why. Game. His traps were taking hares from the edge of the woods. The wolves were getting less. They were angry. They were coming closer. A fence isn't needed someday. A fence is needed now. In the morning, he checked the pit. The boar hadn't come. The tracks showed that the beast had taken a different path to the watering hole. Raeon rearranged the branches. He narrowed the bypass. He left only one passage. Through the pit. The second day of waiting. Nothing. The third. Raeon arrived at dawn and saw. The pit had worked. The boar lay inside. 2 stakes had pierced its side. The beast was alive. It was wheezing. It looked at Raeon with small, angry eyes. Its tusks were covered in blood from trying to escape. Raeon took out his knife. He climbed down into the pit. The beast twitched. Raeon jumped back against the wall. A fang had grazed his thigh by a centimeter. He waited. The boar lay down again. It had weakened. Raeon stepped forward and stabbed it precisely behind the ear. Quickly, cleanly. The beast twitched and went still. Raeon stood in the pit, knee-deep in mud and blood. He was breathing heavily. His hands were shaking. After that, the 12-year-old boy's body wanted only one thing, to lie down and cry. But he didn't lie down. He took out a rope and began to tie up the carcass. Dragging a swamp boar through the forest alone was impossible. He hoisted the carcass onto a sled made of branches and dragged it along. 2 hours to the village. 2 hours of hell. The rope cut into his shoulders. His feet slipped on the snow. He fell 3 times. Each time he got back up. When he dragged the carcass to the edge of the village, people saw him from their houses. Blacksmith Kim ran out first. He grabbed the rope and pulled. Behind him came Dong-ho, Junho. Grandpa Ho hobbled across the yard. The whole village dragged the boar toward the Park family's house. The carcass was enormous. Its fangs were white and curved. The hide was black and tough. A swamp boar. They hadn't seen one like this in Toul in 5 years. Cho stood leaning on his stick and watched. Then he said quietly that now he believed. Raeon sat down in the snow by the porch and closed his eyes. His whole body was burning, but inside he was calm. The boar's bones are worth money. The hide is worth money. The meat is worth lives, their lives, and the Baron won't get any of it. Raeon began building a stockade around the 3 houses, enlisting the villagers to help. He prepared a pitfall for the swamp boar, and on the 3rd day trapped the beast single-handedly. The catch became the major resource for the village. Blacksmith Kim and other neighbors began to help voluntarily. Baron's son had not yet responded to the refusal. Butchering the swamp boar took a whole day. Raeon worked alone. The boys watched. He demonstrated every cut, how to skin it without tearing the hide, how to separate the meat from the bone, how to cut out the tusks without damaging the root, how to scrape the bone until it was white. His hands were covered in blood up to his elbows. The knife slid easily into the carcass. The craftsman's hand made every cut cleaner than he could have done himself. The hide came off in one piece, not a single hole. Rayon stretched it over a frame of poles and began the initial processing. Salt, ash, thyme. A swamp boar hide in the right hands was worth 3 silver in town. In Rayon's hands it would be worth 5, because he knew how to bring the tanning to perfection. He divided the meat into 3 parts, a third for food right now. The whole village ate that evening. Boar meat soup with wild onions. Thick, rich, and hot. People came with their bowls. They sat by the fire that had been lit in the courtyard. They ate in silence. Some cried. Old Granny Ohm, who lived alone on the edge of the village, came with an empty bowl and left with a full one. She bowed to Rayon and said, "May the forest protect the boy." Rayon nodded. He began smoking the second third of the meat. He dug a pit near the house. He built walls out of stones. He lit a fire inside with alder wood. He hung the sliced meat on rods above. The smoke was thick and fragrant. Smoked meat keeps for a long time. Under normal conditions, 2 or 3 months. Under the influence of the hand of the craftsman, he suspected it would last longer, much longer. He salted a third of it, with coarse gray salt that his mother had retrieved from their reserves. The last handful. The salt was running out. That was a problem. Without salt, there are no preserves. Without preserves, there is no winter. He boiled the bones in a cauldron. He stripped the meat from the bones down to the last fiber. He dried the bones, polished them. 6 large bones from a swamp boar lay on the table like ingots, white, smooth, heavy. Each was worth at least a silver coin. The tusks were even more expensive. 2 curved tusks, as long as a palm. They make handles for hunting knives out of these, or amulets, or cane tips. A rare, expensive item, always in demand. Rayon put the bones and tusks in a bag and hid it under the floor. Not the time to sell. No channel yet. There's no merchant he can trust yet. And taking them to the city himself is a 3-day journey in winter without a wagon. Death. Another week passed. The end of the first month. A palisade stood around 5 houses. Not 3 as planned, but 5, because everyone came out to help. Even the village elder, whom Rayon had seen only once before, a man in his 50s, cautious and slippery as a fish. He came with a bow and said that if young Pak needed help, the village was ready. Rayon looked at him and understood. The village head wasn't helping. The village head was playing along. Whoever feeds the village holds the power. The village head sensed this in his gut. Rayon accepted the help. It would be foolish to refuse now, but he remembered that look. Oily, just like the Baron's steward's. Minsu was getting better. Her cough had almost completely gone. Her cheeks had turned pink. She began to leave the house. She walked around the yard in her father's knee-length fur coat. She looked at the palisade. She looked at the smokehouse. She looked at the boys returning from the forest with their catch. Once she walked up to Tegu and sat down silently beside him while he wove a basket. Tegu glanced at her. He broke off a piece of vine and held it out. Minsu took it and began to copy his movements, crookedly. Crooked, but diligent. Tegu watched her hands, and something almost like a smile appeared on his face. He adjusted her fingers, silently. Minsu looked up at him and smiled so that the whole yard grew warmer. It was on that very day that Chanari appeared. Rayon hadn't seen her before. She lived 3 versts away on a farmstead near the neighboring village. She was the daughter of the tracker Cha Mugil, who had died in Chongrim 3 years ago. His body was never found. Nari came to Toul on foot, a bow on her back, men's pants, a wolfskin jacket, her hair pulled back into a bun. Her face was stern for a 16-year-old girl. Her eyes were fierce. She walked through the village without looking around, straight to the Park family's house. She stopped at the stockade. She looked at the smokehouse, at the boar hide stretched over a frame, at the boys cleaning traps in the yard. Then she looked at Rayon. He was sitting on the porch, weaving a new basket. She asked if he was the boy who went to Chongrim every day. Rayon said he was. Nari grimaced. She said she'd heard about him from a vendor on the road, that some snotty-nosed kid from Toul was supposedly hauling swamp boars out of the forest. She'd come to see for herself, because she didn't believe it. Rayon shrugged and kept weaving. Nari stood there and waited. He didn't react. That made her angry. She said her father was the best tracker in the area, that he'd been going to Chongrim for 20 years, and that if the boy thought he was smarter than everyone else, the forest would quickly set him straight. Rayon looked up. He looked her in the eyes, calmly, without a hint of defiance. He said he didn't think he was smarter than everyone else. He thought he was hungrier than everyone else, and hunger teaches you fast. Nari blinked. She hadn't expected that answer from a 12-year-old. She looked at his hands, at the calluses, at the cuts, at the weaving of the basket. Then she crouched down next to him and said, "Show me." Rayon showed her. Not the basket, a noose. He took the finished one out of the bag and held it out to her. Nari took it. She turned it over in her hands. She frowned. She tugged at the knot. The noose wouldn't give. She tugged harder, with both hands. The rope was rotten and thin. It should have snapped. It didn't. Nari looked at Rayon. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a question. He shrugged and replied that the forest helps if you don't go into it with an axe at the ready. Nari was silent. Then she sat down on the step next to him. She was silent for a while longer. Then she said she would go with him tomorrow. Not to learn, to check. Rayon nodded. In the morning, she waited at the gate, with a bow. Rayon came out with an axe and a bag. They went into the forest, in silence. Nari walked confidently. She knew Chongrim, not like he did, in her own way, like a child who had grown up on its edge. She knew the trails, she knew the trees, she knew where the watering holes were. But she walked into the forest with tension, as if into a house where a tragedy had occurred. Every tree reminded her of her father. Every path was his route. Rayon could tell by the way she would freeze at certain turns, by the way she touched the notches on the trunks. Old ones, 3 years old, her father's marks. He didn't ask. He worked, checked the snares, showed her his system. Didn't brag, just did it. Nari watched. She was silent. When he took down the third hair and slung it over his shoulder, she finally spoke. She said her father set snares differently. Rougher, more reliable, thick ropes, the stakes were deep. But he caught hares less often, 1 out of 5 if he was lucky. But Rayon's ropes were as thin as thread, and he caught 3 out of 5. That wasn't right. It didn't happen that way. Rayon replied that everything was right, that the secret wasn't in the rope, but in where to place it. To read the trail, see the animal's habits, set it where it doesn't expect it. Nari listened, her brows furrowed. She thought. Then she asked if he could teach her. Rayon looked at her, 16 years old, an archer, the tracker's daughter, proud, angry with grief. And she came to ask a boy 4 years her junior? He said he would teach her, if she taught him how to shoot. Nari snorted. She said he was too small for a bow. His hands couldn't pull the string. Rayon replied that it wasn't for now, for when he grew up, when his arms were long enough. For now, let him learn the theory, how to aim, how to hold it, how to breathe. Nari looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. They returned together. 5 hairs between the two of them, a partridge, and something new between them. Not friendship yet, but an agreement. Minsu ran out to meet them. She saw Nari. She stopped. She looked up at her. Nari looked down at her. Minsu turned to Rayon and asked if she was his girlfriend. Nari blushed so hard her ears turned red. Rayon calmly replied that she was his partner, and that a partner in the forest is more valuable than any friend. Nari turned away and muttered that she hated children, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Minsu took her by the hand and dragged her over to look at the basket they'd been weaving with Tegu. Nari followed the 6-year-old girl and couldn't pull her hand away, or didn't want to. Yoon-hee stood in the doorway and for the first time in a long while smiled genuinely, not out of relief, from something greater. A bonfire was burning in the courtyard. The boys were cleaning the traps. Blacksmith Kim was hammering away in the smithy. Cho sat on a bench and told Grandpa Ho how he used to hunt deer in his youth. Smoke from the smokehouse rose upward, and the wind carried the scent of smoked meat throughout the video. A month ago, people were dying here. Now they were living here. Rayon butchered a swamp boar and set aside the bone and tusks as a valuable resource. The smokehouse was up and running. Minsu was beginning to recover. Chanari, an archer and the daughter of the deceased tracker, had come to the village. After a joint trip into the forest, they made a pact. Rayon would teach her about traps, and she would teach him archery. In a month, the village of Toul had transformed from a dying place into a thriving one. Nari came every day, without fail, 3 versts from the farmstead to Toul, 3 versts back, through snow, through wind, through darkness. She never complained. Rayon noticed that she left home after dark to be at the gate by dawn. Once he asked why she didn't move closer. Nari replied that the farmstead was her father's home, that she wouldn't abandon it. Rayon nodded and didn't ask again. They worked as a team. Rayon set the traps. Nari provided cover. Her bow was old and heavy. The string was made of sinew. She shot so well that Rayon stood frozen with his mouth agape the first time. 40 meters, a partridge on a branch, 1 arrow, to the neck. The bird didn't even flinch. It fell like a sack. Nari picked up the arrow, wiped it on her pant leg, and moved on, as if nothing had happened. Rayon smiled to himself. A 16-year-old girl shot more accurately than half the cadets he'd taught in his past life. But she had a problem. Nari didn't know how to wait. She went into the forest as if to war. Fast, loudly, headlong. The animals could hear her 100 meters away. She had to shoot from far away and quickly because the animals wouldn't let her get close. Rayon once stopped her on the trail. He said, "Stop." Nari stood still. He said, "Don't move." She didn't move. He said, "Breathe more quietly." She tried. It didn't work. Rayon crouched right on the trail and froze. 1 minute. 2. 3. Nari stood nearby, angry. She wanted to walk. She wanted to do something. She wanted to shoot. But the boy sat there, listening to the silence. In the 4th minute, a hare stepped onto the trail, right toward them. It stopped 5 meters away. It twitched its nose. Rayon didn't even look at it. He just held out his hand and pointed to Nari. "There. No need to chase game. Let the game come to you." Nari looked at the hare and said nothing. Then she quietly said that her father had said the same thing, that the forest doesn't like those who rush. She turned away. Her shoulders tensed. Rayon stood up and walked on. He didn't touch the hare. He let it go. Nari followed behind and remained silent the whole way back. But the next day she walked more quietly. By the middle of the 2nd month, they had found a rhythm, morning in the forest, checking the snares, setting new ones, hunting, if they were lucky, for large game, lunch in the village, work after lunch. Nari taught Rayon the theory of archery, how to position his feet, how to hold his elbow, how to breathe as he exhaled. He couldn't draw the bow, his arms were too weak, but he memorized everything. The muscle memory of this body was storing knowledge that would come in handy when he grew up. Rayon taught Nari about traps, snares, nooses, pit traps, spring-loaded wooden traps. She was a quick learner, her hands were nimble, her mind was sharp, and the gift of transmission was working. The snares Nari set after his training held tighter than the same snares set by Donho or Junho, as if the forest saw something special in her, or saw that the teacher was investing more in her. Rayon tried not to think about it. She's 16, he's 12 on the outside and 34 on the inside. There's nothing to think about. He has to work. At the end of the 2nd month, the snow began to melt. Early spring, the streams swelled, the forest trails became muddy, the traps worked less effectively. The wet ground wouldn't hold the stakes, the ropes were rotting, the whole system had to be rebuilt for the new season, and it was at that very moment that the Baron steward returned, not alone, with 2 men, big, burly men, with clubs, not soldiers, mercenaries, village men from the main road who would break a fence for a penny and break an arm for silver. The steward rode into the village headman's yard. The men stood on either side. The steward spoke loudly so the whole street could hear. Baron's son is displeased. The village of Toul is 2 months in arrears. By law, half of the forest harvest belongs to the landowner. If the debt is not paid within 3 days, the Baron will send not a steward, but collectors. The village head bowed and mumbled. The neighbors hid in their homes. Rayon stood by his stockade and watched. The steward noticed him. He rode up. He looked down at him from his horse. He said he'd heard about the young hunter, that the Baron was impressed, that if the boy was smart, he'd hand over his catch directly to the Baron and get a fair price. Better than selling to outsiders. A greasy smile, a soft voice. Rayon looked up at him, a 12-year-old boy in holey boots. But the boy's eyes weren't childish. The steward noticed this. His smile faltered slightly. Rayon replied that he would think about it. The steward and left. The men with clubs followed him. Nari stood around the corner of the house with a bow in her hand, fingers on the string. Rayon shook his head. Not now. That evening, he gathered those he trusted. Cho, Kim the blacksmith, Nari, Dong Ho and his mother. They sat by the fire. Rayon explained. The Baron has rights under the law of the duchy. Formally, half of the harvest from the Baron's land belongs to the Baron. It's pointless to argue with the law, as long as they don't have their own deed to the land. But the law refers to the yield from the Baron's land. On paper, the lands of Toul belong to the Baron, but the forest, Chongrim, the forbidden forest, Chongrim belongs to no one. It is the duchy's crown lands. The Baron has no claim to them, only the Duke. But the Duke is far away and doesn't care about a small village. Cho snorted. He said the boy was smart. But paper is paper, and a club is a club. The Baron doesn't give a damn about the law when a club is closer. Rayon agreed. That's why they need two things. First, a trade route that bypasses the Baron. If their goods go to market not through the Baron's middlemen but directly, the Baron will lose his leverage. Second, protection. A stockade is good against wolves. Against people with clubs, they need something else. Nari said she had a bow and never missed. Rayon shook his head. Shooting at people is war. They don't need war. They need a position where fighting isn't worth it. Nari crossed her arms and said he thinks too much for a boy. Rayon replied that thinking is useful at any age. Nari snorted, but she stayed. Kim asked what exactly they should do. Rayon said that in a week, the fair in Namwan would begin. It was the nearest town with a free market. It's a 3-day journey. He's preparing a shipment of goods, smoked meat, hides, bones, and tusks. He needs a wagon, a cart, a horse, and guards for the road. The blacksmith said he has a cart, old but still in working order. He doesn't have a horse. Chui said that Grandpa Ho has a gelding in his stable, old but it pulls. Grandpa Ho will give it away for a pot of boar soup for a week. Nari said she'll go as a guard, with a bow. Rayon looked at her. She looked back. No smile. Firm. He nodded. For 3 days before the fair, they worked tirelessly. Rayon pulled supplies from under the floor. 6 swamp boar bones, 2 tusks, 12 hareskins he'd tanned himself, 5 bundles of smoked meat, dried mushrooms, bunches of dried herbs. He laid it all out in the house and examined it. The hides were perfect, soft as fabric, durable, not a single cut. The craftsman's hand had transformed the work of a 12-year-old boy into a masterpiece that he wouldn't be ashamed to show to a tanner in the capital. The smoked meat was surprising too. 2 months in the smokehouse, and it looked like it was made yesterday. No mold, no smell. Dense, dark, and aromatic. Mother helped pack it up, silently. She was afraid. Rayon could see it in her hands. They trembled as she wrapped the hides in canvas. He walked over and placed his palm on top of hers, a small child's palm on top of his mother's. He said he would return in 6 days, with money, with salt, with cloth for Minsu. Yun-hee squeezed his hand and said nothing. Ran and Nari developed a shared rhythm of hunting and learning. The Baron's steward returned with mercenaries and demanded payment. Rayon found a legal loophole in the status of the Chongrim forest as crown land. He gathered the first batch of goods for the fair in Namwan and set off there with Nari as his escort. His mother stayed behind to wait. The road to Namwan led through a mountain pass. It was narrow, muddy, and rutted by carts. The snow had already melted, but the mud was up to the axles. Grandfather Ho's old gelding pulled stubbornly, slowly, but he pulled. Rayon sat on the cart next to the goods. Nari walked alongside with a bow slung over her shoulder. The first day passed without incident. They spent the night by the roadside. Rayon built a fire. He set up a rope perimeter around the camp, a habit from his past life. Nari watched him work and asked how he knew how to set up a rope perimeter. Rayon replied that he'd read it in a book. Nari said she didn't believe him, that books like that didn't exist, and that 12-year-old boys didn't start a fire in 30 seconds with 2 sticks. Rayon said nothing. Nari sat down across from him by the fire. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said that it didn't matter to her who he is. that he had given her more in 2 months than the whole village had in 3 years, that she would stay with him, and that if he didn't want to tell the truth, then he shouldn't. She would wait. Rayon stared at the fire. The flames danced and shadows moved across the tree trunks. He said the truth was simple, that when your father dies and your sister is sick, you quickly learn what usually takes a long time to learn. Nari shook her head. She said it was a lie, but a beautiful one, and she lay down to sleep. Rayon sat by the fire and listened to the night. Wolves howled in the distance, ordinary ones, not shadow wolves. The gelding snored. Nari breathed evenly. He thought that the girl was too smart to be fooled for long. Sooner or later, he would have to explain, but not now. On the second day, they came upon a caravan. 4 wagons, guards, a merchant's flag on the first wagon. The caravan was traveling from Namwan back to the province. Rayon stopped the gelding and waited until the caravan was level with him. A woman was sitting on the first wagon, young, about 22, in an expensive dark green woolen cloak with a mended lining. Rayon noticed the mending right away. The cloak was expensive. The lining had been mended 3 times. A person who wants to look richer than they are, or was rich but isn't anymore. The woman noticed them too. The boy on the wagon with the goods, the girl with the bow, the old gelding. She called out to the driver, and the wagon stopped. She jumped down from the cart with ease. She walked over. She looked at Rayon, then at the goods. Her eyes settled on the pelts. She reached out and ran her finger over the top of a hair pelt. She paused. She ran her finger over it again. She lifted the pelt. She looked at the underside, at the finish, at the seams. Then she looked at Rayon with an expression he recognized instantly. That's how a professional looks when they see the work of another professional. She asked who had tanned them. Rayon replied that he had. The woman paused. Then she introduced herself. Han Sea, a merchant. The daughter of merchant Han Chol-su from the duchy's capital. Ray introduced himself in her turn. Say asked where he was taking the goods. Rayon said to the fair in Namwan. Say shook her head. She said the fair in Namwan was a dump, just haggling peddlers. They'd pay a quarter of the price for these hides and still shortchange him, and they'd buy the bones for the price of firewood. Rayon asked if there was another option. Saya smiled, for the first time, a subtle smile of a shrewd person who sees a profit. She said there were always options. It was a matter of price. They pulled over to the side of the road and talked for an hour. Saya calculated in her head faster than Rayon could keep up. She sorted all his goods into categories. Top-grade tanned hareskins, 8 silver coins a dozen if sold in Gyeongwon. In Namwan, they'd give 3. Marsh boar bones, 2 silver coins apiece at the fair, 5 in the duchy's capital. Fangs, 10 silver coins a pair if he finds an alchemist, 4 at the fair. Smoked meat, half a silver coin a bundle here, a full silver coin in town. Total, at the fair he'll make a maximum of 15 silver. Through her in the duchy's capital, 45, a 3-fold difference. Rayon listened and did the math himself. Shay wasn't lying. The numbers added up, but trusting a merchant on the road is foolish. He asked what she wanted for the service. Shay raised an eyebrow. She said she usually takes 1/5 of the proceeds, but that's usually, and right now she has no goods. The wagon train is traveling empty. Her father's competitors had cut off all her channels in the capital. She'd been traveling through the provinces for 3 months, looking for something to sell. And now, on the road, a boy with hides so finely tanned that the capital's leather workers would choke with envy. She said she was willing to work for 1/10, if he could ensure a steady supply of goods. Rayon looked at her, 22 years old, an expensive raincoat, a tailored lining, sharp, intelligent eyes, the daughter of a ruined merchant. She wasn't just looking for goods, she was looking for a way out, just like him. He held out his hand. Shay looked at the small, dirty palm, then she shook it, firmly, businesslike. Nari stood to the side and watched with an expression that Rayon preferred not to decipher. They didn't go to Namwan. They turned around and headed back to Toul. Shay rode alongside with her convoy, 4 carts, empty. But in a month they would be full. Rayon sat on his cart and, for the first time since the transfer, felt that the plan was coming together. He had a forest, he had hands, he had students. Now he had a merchant. One problem remained, the Baron. But the Baron could wait. C rode alongside, examining the hides as they went. She stroked them with her fingers. She counted in her head. Her lips moved silently. Nari walked on the other side of the cart and didn't look at C. She looked into the forest. On the 3rd day they returned to Toul. Their mother ran out to meet them. Minsu followed her. The girl threw herself into her brother's arms and hung there. Rayon caught her with one hand, light, but heavier than a month ago, gaining weight. Good. C jumped down from the cart and looked around. A small village, crooked houses, a new stockade around 5 yards, a smokehouse, hide frames. She looked at it all and said one word, potential. Rayon smirked. C stayed. On the way to the fair, Rayon met the merchant Hans C, who valued his goods at 3 times the fair price. They struck a deal. Say takes 1/10 of the proceeds for selling through her channels in the duchy's capital. Rayon gained a sales channel, bypassing the Baron. Saya arrived in Toul and stayed. Saya worked quickly. In the first week, she compiled a list of everything in Toul and everything that was needed. She counted on her fingers and in her head. She muttered the numbers under her breath. She wrote with charcoal on scraps of birch bark. Rayon's mother set aside a corner of the house for her. Saya slept on a straw-stuffed mattress and didn't complain. In the morning, she was already sitting at the table, writing. In the evening, she sat at the table, counting. Minsu would come over and look at the numbers. Saya explained. This is the expenditure. This is the income. If the income is greater than the expenditure, we live. If it's less, we die. Simple. Minsu nodded seriously and tried to calculate along with her. Saya didn't rush her. She showed her. The gift of transmission worked not only in the forest. After Saya's explanations, Minsu calculated in her head faster than any child her age had a right to calculate. Saya sent the first convoy 10 days later. 12 hair pelts, 6 bones of marsh boar, 2 tusks, 10 bundles of smoked meat, everything packed, labeled, listed on birch bark. C went herself, alone, with a hired driver from a neighboring village. Rayon offered a guard. C refused. She said there were no bandits on the duchy's roads in winter. It's too cold. Bandits are people too. They stay home and wait for spring. She returned 12 days later, with money, 42 silver coins. Rayon had never seen so much money in his life. Neither had his mother. Yunhee stood there looking at the coins laid out on the table, her hands trembling. Saya laid out the report. She sold the hides to a tanner in Gyeongwon for 8 silver coins a dozen. The bones were bought by an alchemist at the Duke's court for 2.5 per piece. The fangs went for 12 silver coins a pair. The innkeepers bought the meat for a silver coin per bundle. Total, 47, minus travel expenses and the coachman's fee, 5 silver coins, 42 in profit. Saya's share, 4 silver coins and 2 copper coins. Rayon gets 37 silver coins and 8 copper coins. He divided the money into 3 piles. First, salt, cloth, tools, ropes, nails, the essentials, 15 silver. Second, a reserve, in case of illness or misfortune, 10 silver, half in a pot. Third, expansion, 12 silver for growth, a new smokehouse, more frames for hides, tools for the furrier's shop. Sia watched as he allocated the money. He was counting correctly, not like a boy, like a master. She didn't say it out loud, but she thought it. With the money came opportunity. Rayon sent Donho and Junho to the neighboring village for salt. They bought 20 pounds, a large sack. Now they could salt meat for storage. Kim, the blacksmith, received an order for new tools, furrier's knives, scrapers for hides, hooks for the smokehouse. A week's worth of work. Kim smiled so much his mustache. Rayon began building a second smokehouse. The first one couldn't keep up. The haul had increased. Nari now hunted on her own. Her snares worked. Not as well as Rayon's, but better than anyone else's. She brought back 2 or 3 hares a day, plus a bird. Donho had also reached a steady level, 1 or 2 hares. Junho wasn't as good, but he made up for it with stubbornness. Taegu didn't hunt. Taegu wove. Boxes, baskets, frames for hides, rope nets for drying meat. His hands created things that the forest accepted through the gift of transmission. Every box Taegu wove was a work of art. Smooth, sturdy, beautiful. Saya looked at one of them and said that in the capital they'd give a silver coin for a basket like that. Taegu looked at her with wide eyes. He didn't believe it. Rayon placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded. The boy smiled, silently, as always, but his eyes sparkled. In the middle of the 3rd month, spring truly arrived. The snow had melted, the ground had thawed, the streams were flowing, and with spring came Yoon-hae-in, a herbalist from the neighboring village of Mulsan. Raeon had heard about her from Che, a girl of about 19. She knew every herb, every root, every mushroom in the area. Her mother had been a herbalist. She went to Cheongrim for ginseng and never returned. Since then, Hae-in hasn't set foot in the forest. She gathers only at the edge of the forest. She had come to Toul for willow bark to make a decoction. She was quiet, her headscarf pulled down over her eyebrows. She spoke little. She looked around for a long time. She saw the smokehouse. She saw the frames for the hides. She saw Raeon sitting on the porch, rubbing the hide with the tanning solution he'd made himself. She walked over. She looked at the solution. She sniffed it. She asked if it contained black alder bark. Raeon said it did. Hae-in nodded. She said that if he added fern root extract, the hide would become softer and wouldn't smell. Raeon looked at her. He tried it. He added it. The difference was immediate. The hide under his hands became like silk. Hae-in watched, and for the first time during the entire conversation, smiled slightly. Raeon offered her a deal. He would go into the forest and bring back the herbs on her list. She would treat Min-soo and teach him the basics of herbalism. Hae-in thought about it for a long time. Her fear of the forest fought against what Raeon was offering. A way out. Access to what she had been deprived of for 3 years. The deep herbs of Cheongrim that grow only in the thicket. She agreed. The first list was long, 23 items. Roots, bark, leaves, mosses, mushrooms. Raeon didn't know half the names. Hae-in explained each one, what it looked like, where it grew, when to gather it, how to store it. She spoke quietly but precisely, without unnecessary words. Every sentence was information. Raeon listened as if in a lecture. In his past life he knew plants, but earths, the ones here were different. Same principles, different species. Hae-in was an encyclopedia, a living, quiet, priceless one. He went into the forest with her list for 3 days. He brought them back. Hae-in checked them. She rejected half of the first batch. Wrong root, wrong bark, cut at the wrong time. Raeon didn't argue. He went again. The second time she rejected a third of it. The third time she accepted everything. Hae-in looked at the basket of herbs and said that even her mother had gathered worse. Then she fell silent. She turned away. Her shoulders trembled. Raeon left and quietly closed the door. Hae-in began to treat Min-soo, not with magic, with herbs. A decoction of pine needles and honey for the cough. A burdock root compress on her chest. A mint infusion at night to help her sleep. Min-soo drank it all without fuss. She had grown accustomed to trusting those her brother brought. Within 2 weeks the cough was completely gone. Min-soo breathed easily. She ran around the yard. She shouted. She laughed. Yoon-hee cried every evening, quietly, not out of grief, because her daughter was healthy. Hae-in sat in the corner, sorting through herbs. She watched Min-soo. She watched Raeon. She watched the house that had been a grave just 2 months ago and was now a home. She stopped going back to Mulsan. She stayed. Raeon didn't ask her to. She chose to stay on her own. Spring was gaining strength. The ground thawed. Grass began to sprout. The forest came to life, and with the forest, the animals came to life. Raeon was the first to notice the change. The tracks on the trails had changed. The familiar hare routes had shifted southward. The partridges had left their usual haunts. The fox den by the western stream was empty. The animals were retreating from the depths of the forest toward the edge. Like a wave, something was driving them? The voice of the thicket. He had sensed it before as a quiet background, where it was calm, where it wasn't. Now the background had grown louder. Northwest of Toul, deep within Cheongrim, lay an area he avoided. Not out of fear, out of instinct. There the forest was silent, completely. No birds, not a rustle. Dead silence. Raeon didn't know what it meant, but he knew that the animals were fleeing from there and running toward the village. That was both good and bad. Good because there was more prey. bad because large animals were following the small ones, and the largest ones were coming last. Shadow wolves. He saw their tracks, not solitary, a pack, 8 or 10 of them. The tracks were fresh, night tracks. They were moving 200 meters from the village, just moving for now. Raeon reinforced the stockade. He added sharpened stakes along the outer perimeter. He dug a shallow trench. He filled the bottom with stakes. He camouflaged it. A line of defense. Not against people, against beasts. Nari helped. She knew the shadow wolves. Her father had told her about them. Black fur, yellow eyes, twice as big as normal ones. Fast, smart. The pack works as a single organism. The leader commands. The rest obey. Killing one means angering them all. She said her father never got involved with shadow packs. He went around them, avoided them. Raeon nodded. He wasn't planning on getting involved either, but the wolves might decide otherwise. Along with the news about the wolves came word from Sia. She had returned from her second trip to the capital with money and information. The money was good, 60 silver pieces for the second batch. The pelts were selling like hotcakes. The tanner in Kyungwon ordered another 30. The alchemist requested swamp boar bones on a regular basis. The news was bad. Baron Sun knew about the trade. His men had seen Sia's caravan on the road. They asked what she was carrying and where it was coming from. Sia didn't answer, but the questions were asked. The Baron is calculating. The Baron is thinking. The Baron is preparing something. Raeon sat by the fire that evening and laid out the situation. 2 threats. Wolves from the outside. The Baron from the outside. And both are approaching at the same time. That's how it always is. Problems don't line up in a queue. They come in droves. He chose his priority. The wolves were more dangerous. The Baron was just thinking for now. The wolves were already prowling the fence. He spent the next 3 days in the forest from dawn to dusk. He studied the pack. Reading the forest revealed the picture to him. The pack had come from the northwest, from that very dead zone. They were running. They weren't hunting at the edge of the forest out of hunger. They were hiding. The leader was massive, the largest shadow wolf Choi had seen in the last 20 years, a paw print the size of an adult man's palm. Raeon found their den, a ravine 1.5 miles from the village, dark, damp, littered with windfall. The wolves lay there during the day. At night they came out. They circled around, sniffed the air, until they attacked. For now, he returned and called a meeting. Cho, Kim, Nari, Sea, Dongho. He told them what he had seen. Cho's face darkened. He said that a pack at the edge of the forest was a bad sign, that shadow wolves usually didn't come near villages. Something had happened deep in the forest. Something had driven them out. Raeon confirmed it. He said the dead zone in the northwest was growing. He could feel it. Cho looked at him sharply. He asked how he knew. Raeon replied that the forest was showing it. Choi was silent for a long time. Then he said that when he was young and used to go deep into Chonrim, the old hunters spoke of the heart of the forest, a place at the very center of the thicket. No one went there. From there came the power that kept the forest alive. If the heart is sick, then all of Chonrim is sick. The beasts are fleeing, the shadows grow thicker, and what emerges from the depths becomes more terrifying with each passing year. Raeon listened. It matched what he was feeling. But now was not the time to think about the heart of the forest. Now they had to think about the pack at the fence. He proposed a plan. Don't attack the pack. Don't wait for it to attack. Redirect them. Create a corridor of traps and obstacles that would lead the pack away from the village and back into the depths. Not to kill them, to drive them away. Nari said it was madness, that shadow wolves weren't rats that could be driven away with noise. Raeon agreed, but noise wouldn't work. Scent would. Heron raised her head. She had been sitting in the corner, silent throughout the council. Now she spoke. She said there was an herb, Chonrim's bitter wormwood. It grows on the western slope. The wolves can't stand it. The scent overwhelms their sense of smell. They'll go around the wormwood thickets in a wide arc. If we rub wormwood on the trees in an arc around the village, the pack will move away. Raeon looked at Heron. She looked back at him. Quiet, attentive eyes. It was the first time she had spoken at a council meeting, the first time her words had decided something. He said we needed wormwood, a lot. Heron said she knew where, on the western slope, beyond the stream, but that was in the forest, and she didn't go into the forest. Raeon said he would go with her, that she would show him where, and he would gather it. Heron clenched her hands into fists. she thought. Then she nodded. They set out at dawn. Heron walked behind him, in small steps, her hands pressed to her chest, her face pale. She was so afraid that Rayon could hear her teeth chattering, but she walked. He didn't rush her. He walked slowly. He stopped. He showed her the forest not as a hostile thicket, but as a place where he worked every day. Here's a hare's trail. Here's a thrush's nest. Here are badger tracks. Ordinary things. Understandable. Not scary. Heron listened. Her breathing gradually evened out. They reached the western slope by noon. Wormwood grew thickly, silvery green with a sharp, bitter smell. Heron showed him which stems to pick. Rayon cut them and put them in a bag. He filled 2 bags, heavy, but bearable. On the way back, Harin walked more confidently. She didn't press her hands to her chest. She looked around. She stopped once, bent down, pulled a root from under a rock, showed it to Rayon, said it was the root of vitality, rare. Her mother had been looking for it for years. Heals wounds, stops bleeding, grows only in the shade of old fir trees. Her eyes were shining, not from fear, from the discovery. Rayon saw that moment. The herbalist had found her herb. The fear hadn't gone away, but something stronger had taken its place, a calling. That evening, Rayon set to work. He rubbed wormwood on the tree trunks in an arc around the village, the north side, the west, a semicircle. He left the southeast east, a corridor. A ravine lay in that direction. Beyond the ravine, a deep forest. The pack would take the path of least resistance, away from the wormwood, through the corridor, back into the thicket. Nari covered him with her bow while he worked. 2 days, 2 nights. On the 3rd night, Rayon didn't sleep. He sat on the roof of the house and listened. A howl. Distant, then closer, then distant again. The pack was moving, stumbling upon the wormwood, retreating, drifting south, toward the corridor. By morning, the howling had moved to the southeast, far away. Rayon climbed down from the roof. His legs were stiff, his eyes were heavy. Nari was waiting below with hot broth. She stood looking up at him, even though he was a head shorter. That's how you look at someone you're beginning to truly respect. The pack was gone. Not forever, but gone for now, and the village breathed again. The shadow wolves emerged from the depths of Chungrim and began prowling near the village. Rayon learned about the dead zone in the forest and the heart of Chungrim from Old Cho. Hedin suggested using bitter wormwood against the wolves and entered the forest with Ray Yong for the first time. They created a wormwood corridor and led the pack away from the village. Baron's son learned of Say's trade and is preparing a response. After the pack left, Rayon didn't let his guard down. He knew the shadow wolves would return. Not these ones, others, or maybe these same ones. Chungrim was driving the beasts out from within, and a bundle of wormwood wouldn't stop that. But for now, there was a respite, and he used it. 3 months after the move, early spring, the snow had melted, the ground had dried out. Rayon stood in the middle of the clearing he'd found during his first month there. Flat, 20 meters wide, a stream nearby, spruce trees all around. This would be his hunting lodge. Not the one in the village. The annex to his mother's house had served as a house and a smokehouse. But that was temporary. He needed a real place. A big one. With a smokehouse for 10 carcasses. With a furrier's workshop. With a shed for butchering. With housing for the workers. He began to build. Blacksmith Kim forged nails and staples. Don Ho and Jun Ho felled trees and hauled logs. Taegu wove walls from vines. Cho sat on a stump and gave orders. He couldn't do manual labor, but he knew how to erect a log cabin, how to cut a corner, how to lay a beam so the roof wouldn't collapse under the snow. His experience was worth 10 workers. Nari helped with the heavy lifting. She chopped wood just as well as the boys. She scolded Junho when he cut corners. She urged Donho on. He'd blush and work faster. Rayon handled the crucial parts, the latches for the doors, the window frames, the hooks for the smokehouse. Every detail under his hands was strengthened by the hand of the craftsman. The door on its hinges moved smoothly and silently. The frames stood level, without a single gap. The hooks, made from twisted iron, looked as if they had been forged by a master from the capital. The forest helped. Not directly. The trees they cut down for construction fell conveniently. The stumps didn't hinder clearing. The stream didn't overflow like in the neighboring ravines. The ground beneath the foundation turned out to be dense and rocky. Perfect. As if someone had prepared this spot in advance. Rayon thought about this at night. The forest had chosen him. Yes, the system to him. It provides resources. It helps him build. In return, the forest wants something. Not payment, not a sacrifice, something else. He didn't yet understand exactly what, but he felt it. Every time he did something for a specific person. A door for the Che family's house, a bench for Grandma Ohm, new hooks for Widow Pai. Every time, the forest responded with warmth, with approval, a quiet whisper at the edge of his consciousness, a gift in exchange for protection. He did things for people, and the forest gave him more. The connection was simple. Honest labor, concrete care, the forest's response. Construction took 3 weeks. By mid-spring, a building stood in the clearing. Rough, log-built, but sturdy. One large room for work, an extension for the smokehouse, a shed for butchering, a lockable storage shed. Rayon stood in front of the building and looked. Tool's first hunting lodge. His lodge. Chui stood nearby, leaning on a stick. He was silent. Then he said that 20 years ago there had been a hunting lodge in Tool, under Rayon's father. No, under the current Baron's grandfather. Back then, the village was alive. Then the Baron took everything and closed the lodge. Since then, the village had been dying. 20 years. And now there's a new one. Small, crooked, but it stands. Rayon looked at the old man. Chui was looking at the estate, his eyes shining. Nari approached and stood silently beside him. Saya came out of the building with a birch bark notebook and said that the space would be enough to process 20 carcasses a month. If they expanded the smokehouse and added a second shed, then 30. Aaron brought bundles of dried herbs and hung them along the walls to keep out the flies, to prevent rot, to mask the smell. Minsu ran through the doors and shouted that it was beautiful here. Yunhee stood at a distance. She looked at her son, at the building, at the people around her. She pressed her hands to her chest. Rayon walked up to her. He said this was just the beginning. Yunhee shook her head. She said that for her, this was already more than she had dared to hope for. The opening of the courtyard had changed everything. Now Tool had a center, not the village head's house, not the church that never existed. The hunting courtyard. This is where they brought their game. This is where they butchered it. This is where they smoked it. This is where they tanned the hides. This is where they paid. Rayon set the prices. Fair ones. A whole hare, 4 kopecks. A partridge, 2 kopecks. An unprocessed pelt, 1 kopek. Processed pelts were accepted for sale through Saya, with payment due after they were sold. Everything was transparent. Everything was recorded. Saya kept the ledger. Paper she had brought from the capital replaced birch bark. Every transaction, every income, every expense. The villagers brought what they could. Old Moon, whom Rayon had never seen before, came with 3 fox pelts. Good ones. He said he'd caught them himself. Rayon accepted them. He paid. Moon left with the money and returned 3 days later with 2 more. Widow Pei began helping in the smokehouse. Her eldest son was learning butchering from Rayon. The blacksmith's wife came to scrape the skins, silently, diligently. Rayon paid everyone, not much, but honestly. For the first time in Tool, people worked not for food, but for money. Word got around. 2 young men came from the neighboring village. Young, strong. They said they wanted to work. Rayon took them on. He showed them. He taught them. They went into the forest with Donho and set snares. A woman came from the village over the hill with her daughter. She asked if there was work for their hands. Rayon put them to work skinning hides. A week later, the daughter was doing it just as well as Widow Pei. Tool was growing, slowly, 1 person at a time, 1 family at a time, but it grew. In the evening, Rayon stood on the porch of the hunting lodge and looked out at the village, smoke rising from 7 chimneys. A month ago, there were 3. People walked down the street, talking, laughing. Children ran by the palisade, Minsu among them, lively, loud, healthy. Saya came over and stood beside him. She said the 3rd shipment of goods was ready, twice as much as before. Hides, bone, meat, tegu baskets, herein herbal mixtures in canvas pouches, new goods, healing mixtures from the herbalist in Cheonggrim. In the capital, they pay gold for this. Rayon nodded. He asked when she was leaving. Saya said tomorrow. Then she paused. Then she said she'd overheard a conversation in the capital. The Baron's men are looking for a buyer who's intercepting the flow of spoils from the western villages. They don't know yet that she's the buyer, but they will. It's only a matter of time. Rayon was silent. He looked at the forest. Cheongrim darkened against the backdrop of the sunset sky. Huge, quiet, attentive. He said that when the Baron arrived, they would be ready. Saya looked at him. At the 13-year-old boy in dirty boots. At the boy who had revived the dead village in 3 months. Who had built a hunting lodge with his bare hands. Who commanded grown men, and they listened. She said she believed him. Then she went to prepare the wagon train. Rayon stayed on the porch. Nari sat on the step below, sharpening arrowheads. She didn't look up, but she heard everything. She said that if the Baron sent men, she'd kill the first one before he even crossed the palisade. Rayon replied that it wouldn't come to that. Nari said it would. That people like the Baron don't stop on their own. They are stopped. Rayon said nothing. Nari was right, but for now, he had no plan against the Baron. Only against the wolves. Only against hunger. Only against winter. The Baron was a different level. He needed more people, more money, more influence, or one good idea. He looked at the forest. The forest was silent, but the silence was not empty. It was patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to find the answer on their own. The Baron didn't wait for summer. He struck at the beginning of the 4th month, not by himself, through the village headman. The headman came to Rayon in the morning with a piece of paper in his hand. The Baron's seal, red wax, a decree stating that all forest game within the district's territory must be surrendered to Baron Sun Gihun's hunting estate. Violation is punishable by confiscation of property and expulsion from the village. The village headman did not look him in the eye. He handed over the paper and stepped back. Rayon read it, slowly, every word. Then he folded the paper and tucked it into his bosom. He called for Sol. Sol had appeared in Toul 2 weeks ago. Rayon hadn't mentioned her before because there was nothing to say. She had come at night, alone, with no belongings, in a dress torn at the shoulder, a bruise on her cheekbone, red eyes. The daughter of the village headman of the neighboring village of Kimchon, 17 years old. Baron Sun wanted to marry her off to his son so he could take Kimchon's lands through the marriage. Sola refused. Her father hit her. She left at night through the forest, 3 hours in the dark through the spring mud. She came to Toul because she had heard about a boy who didn't chase anyone away. Rayon met her at the doorstep. He looked at the bruise, at her torn dress, at her hands, trembling from the cold and fear. He said one thing. If she wanted to stay, she could stay. If she wanted to leave, he would provide a wagon and a guard. Her choice, not his. Solia stayed. Within 2 weeks, it became clear that she was the only literate person in Toul. She read, she wrote, in the 3 dialects of the duchy. She knew etiquette, she knew the law, she knew how to draft a letter that the Duke's chancellery would accept. She was exactly what Rayon needed right now. Solia read the Baron's decree, carefully, carefully. Then she raised her head and said that the decree was null and void. The Baron has the right to harvest game from his own land, that is true. But Rayon's hunting lodge stands on the edge of Cheongrim. Cheongrim is crown land of the duchy. The Baron does not own the forest. The Baron's decree applies only to his lands, and the forest does not belong to his lands. To secure this, one document is needed, a petition addressed to the Duke regarding the right to use crown lands, signed by the villagers and sealed with a stamp. The Duke will not refuse. He has no interest in a small village, but formally, crown lands fall under his jurisdiction. If the village pays the tax directly to the Duke, the Baron loses his right to the forest's resources. Rayon looked at Solia. He asked how long it would take to draft the petition. Solia replied, 2 days. Rayon nodded. 2 days. Write it. Solia sat down at the table and began to write. Her handwriting was even and clear. Official language. Phrases that Rayon didn't understand, but that the Duke's official would. Minsu sat nearby and watched as Solia formed the letters. She asked what she was writing. Solia replied that she was writing a letter to an important person so that their village wouldn't be mistreated. Minsu nodded seriously and said she wanted to learn how to write important letters. Solia smiled. For the first time in 2 weeks, she said she would teach her. Later. The petition was ready the following evening. Solia worked without a break. Rayon gathered the villagers. He explained, simply, without long words. The Baron wants to take what they've earned. The law says the forest belongs to the Duke. If the village appeals directly to the Duke and receives a charter, the Baron won't be able to do anything about it legally. To do this, everyone must sign the petition. Those who could read and write would sign. Those who couldn't would dip their finger in ink. The village elder turned pale. He said this was a rebellion, that the Baron would burn the village. Rayon looked at him. He said, a rebellion is when people take up pitchforks, but paper is the law, and that the Baron might burn the village. But he cannot burn the Duke's charter if the Duke signs it, because then it would be the Baron's own rebellion against the Duke, and the Baron would not rebel against the Duke. The village elder did not sign. Everyone else signed. 23 signatures, 23 fingers and ink. Even Grandma Ohm, even Grandpa Ho. Rayon placed the petition in a leather tube he had made himself. The tube turned out sturdy, smooth, and waterproof. The hand of the craftsman. C took the tube and left for the duchy's capital, not with goods, with a document. A 6-day journey, 6 days of waiting. The Baron did not wait 6 days. On the 3rd day after C's departure, 5 horsemen rode into Toul. Not a steward, not mercenaries with clubs. The Baron's men, the real ones, in leather jackets, with swords. The leader dismounted at the village elder's house. He entered without knocking. He came out a minute later with the elder, who was shaking like a leaf. They walked through the village, to the hunting lodge. Rayon stood at the entrance, Nari behind him, with a bow, an arrow on the string. The 5 of them stopped 10 paces away. The elder looked at Rayon, at the boy. He smirked. He said that Baron's son was inviting young Pak to visit, to discuss trade matters, amicably. Rayon replied that he appreciated the invitation, that he would discuss trade matters with pleasure, here, in his own courtyard. The elder stopped smiling. He said the invitation was not up for discussion. Rayon said that any invitation was up for discussion, and that if the Baron wanted to talk, he could send a messenger, or come himself. Rayon's courtyard is open to guests, but he won't go to the Baron. The elder placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. Nari drew her bowstring. Silence. The village froze. Blacksmith Kim stood by the forge with a hammer in his hand. Donho and Junho stood by the palisade with axes. Taegu was around the corner with a pike. Heirin stood in the doorway of the hunting lodge. Sola was behind her. Minsu pressed herself against her mother by the window. The elder looked around. He counted. 5 against the village. The village was small, but fierce, and the girl with the bow, 10 paces away, wouldn't miss. He took his hand off his sword, said he'd pass the message on to the Baron. He turned and rode away. The 5 were gone. The village breathed a sigh of relief. Nari lowered her bow. Her hands weren't shaking. Rayon looked at her. He said thank you. Nari shrugged and replied that the arrow was for the second one. She had planned to hit the first one in the temple with the hilt. Rayon didn't know if she was joking or not. He decided she wasn't. 6 days of waiting stretched into an eternity. Rayon didn't sit idle. He was fortifying. A palisade around the hunting lodge. The moat was deeper. The stakes were sharper. A second gate at the rear in case of retreat. A cache in the forest with a supply of food and blankets. If the Baron struck before Sea returned, they had to hold out. Nari trained the boys, not in hunting, in shooting. Donho and Junho were poor shots, but they threw stones from slings with accuracy. Taegu neither shot nor threw. Taegu set traps around the village, tripwires, pits, rope nooses at ankle height. Quietly and carefully. His traps were invisible. Rayon checked them and nodded each time. The boy was a master. Hedin prepared other things. Burn ointment, bandages made of canvas soaked in herbal infusion, hemostatic powder made from dried yarrow. She didn't say why. Everyone understood anyway. Solia was writing, a second petition, a third, copies, in case the first one didn't get through. Each copy in a separate tube. Rayon hid them in different places, one in a hiding spot in the forest, one at Cho's under the floor, one at the blacksmith's in the smithy. On the 7th day, Sea returned, without the wagon, riding a stranger's horse, dirty, tired, with a tube in her hand. She jumped down at the gate and handed the tube to Rayon. He opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first, a receipt from the Duke's office acknowledging receipt of the petition, a seal, an official's signature, the case has been registered. The second, a note from the official personally to say, unofficial. It states that the Duke will review the petition within a month, that the crown lands of Cheonggrim do not actually belong to the Baron, that there is a precedent, and that if the village is willing to pay the tax directly to the Duke, the charter will be issued. Raeon put the documents back. He looked at Seah. She was staggering from exhaustion. 6 days in the saddle, with almost no breaks. He told her to go to sleep. Seah shook her head. She said there was more news. Bad news. The Baron knows about the Puth. His men are in the Chancellery. They reported it. The Baron is furious. He won't wait a month. Raeon nodded. He had expected this. The question was what the Baron would do. The answer came 3 days later, at night. Raeon woke to the voice of the thicket. Not a whisper, a scream. The forest was screaming. To the southeast, where the shadow pack had gone, Raeon jumped up, ran out onto the porch. Silence. The village slept, but the forest beyond the stockade hummed. The treetops swayed though there was no wind, and in that hum he heard a howl. Close, very close. Shadow wolves. They hadn't left. They'd returned. No, they'd been brought back. Raeon understood instantly. The wormwood barrier. Someone had cut down the trees rubbed with wormwood, removed the barrier, cleared the way. The Baron's men. They didn't attack the village themselves. They removed what was protecting the village from the pack. Let the wolves do the work. Nari rushed out of the Cho house where she had been staying for the past week, bow in hand, quiver on her back. She heard it too. Raeon shouted to rouse the people. Nari ran through the courtyards. She knocked on doors. She shouted. The village was awake within a minute. Men came out with whatever was at hand. Axes, stakes, pitchforks, blacksmith Kim with a hammer, Dong Ho and Jun Ho with slings. Raeon positioned people along the palisade, quickly, precisely, just like in drills. Women and children to the center, into the hunting yard. The door bolted. Heirin was inside with bandages and ointments. Minsu and her mother were with her. Sola too. The howling grew louder. The pack was coming. Raeon took a pike and a torch. He stepped outside the palisade, alone. Nari shouted for him to come back. He didn't come back. He walked toward them, not because he was brave, because he knew. The pack was following the scent of meat from the smokehouse, the scent of people. If he met them before the village, if he led them away, if he showed them who was in charge here, the forest hummed around him. The voice of the thicket screamed in his head. Not forward, not that way, dangerous. Raeon walked on, a torch in his left hand, a pike in his right. The boy's body shook with fear, his legs buckled, but he kept walking. They emerged from the darkness like shadows, black, huge, yellow eyes. 10 pairs of yellow eyes in the darkness, the leader in front, a beast the size of a calf, fur bristling, mouth open, long white fangs. Raeon stopped, raised the torch. The leader stopped too, 10 meters between them. Raeon looked the beast in the eyes. He didn't look away. In his past life, he knew you shouldn't meet a predator's gaze. Here it was different. Here it wasn't predator and prey. Here were two creatures, both fleeing from something deep in the forest. Raeon spoke, not with the wolf, with the forest. He didn't speak the words aloud. He thought. He asked. Not for strength, not for protection, for understanding. He told the forest that these beasts were not enemies, that they were fleeing from corruption, that the village was no threat to them, and the pack was no threat to the village, that they needed to go their separate ways. The forest answered, for the first time, not in a whisper, with a voice, not with words, with a sensation. The ground beneath his feet trembled. Quietly, barely perceptibly, the trees along the path swayed, the branches lowered. They formed a corridor, not a wall, a passage, away from the village, to the east, toward the distant ravine where it was safe. The leader raised his head. He drew in a breath. He looked at the corridor of branches. He looked at Raeon. Yellow eyes, not angry, tired. The beast turned and walked. The pack followed. 10 shadows slipped into the corridor and vanished into the darkness. Raeon stood there. The torch was burning out. The spear felt as heavy as a log in a child's hand. His legs buckled. He sat down right on the ground, and only then did he realize he was crying. Not out of fear, because the forest had heard him. For real, for the first time. Nari found him 2 minutes later. He was sitting on the trail in the mud with the extinguished torch. She knelt down beside him, silently. Then she hugged him, tightly, the way you hug someone you almost lost. Raeon didn't move. His body was small. Her hands were big, warm. She whispered that he was an idiot, that he would never go out alone again, that she would kill him herself if he did that one more time. Rayon didn't argue. The Baron's men destroyed the wormwood barrier, and the shadow wolves returned to the village. Rayon went out to meet the pack alone. He spoke to the forest, and Chongrim answered aloud for the first time. The forest created a corridor of branches, and the pack left. This was a turning point. Rayon established a direct connection with Chongrim for the first time. Sola drafted a petition, and Saya received a receipt from the Duke's office. After the night with the wolves, the village changed. People saw the boy go out beyond the palisade alone with a torch. They saw the forest sway. They saw the pack leave. No one could explain it, but everyone saw it. The village elder stopped talking about the Baron. Grandma Ohm placed a bowl of porridge at the gate of the hunting grounds. Every morning, she said it was for the forest spirit. Rayon didn't correct her. The gift of protection had grown stronger after that night. Every morning, gifts from the forest lay by the porch. Not branches, not mushrooms, bundles of herbs that Heron valued as highly as silver, ginseng roots, rare berries that grew only deep within Chongrim. One morning, a ghost deer's antler lay on the threshold, white as bone, warm to the touch. Shea took it in her hands, and her hands trembled. She said that a ghost deer's antler was worth 5 gold pieces. 5 gold pieces. A minor nobleman's annual income. Rayon put the antler in a hiding place. Not for sale. Not yet. A month passed. Summer. The village ran like a well-oiled machine. The hunting lodge received game every day. The smokehouse smoked from morning till night. The furrier's workshop processed 10 hides a week. C sent wagons to the capital twice a month. Money was coming in. Silver was piling up. Rayon began paying people in silver instead of copper coins. More people came from the city. Young men, a family with children, an old carpenter with his wife. Tool grew from 10 houses to 20, then 25. Rayon was building. New houses, new workshops. Blacksmith Kim doubled the size of his forge. He hired an apprentice. He forged not only nails and staples, but also knives. Hunting knives based on Rayon's designs, with handles made of swamp boar bone. C sold them in the capital for 3 silver coins apiece. Heron opened a shop, a small one, near the hunting lodge. Herbs, ointments, decoctions, bandages. Tool's first pharmacy. People came to her from neighboring villages, women with sick children, old men with aching joints. Heron treated them quietly and patiently. Sometimes Rayon would find her in the evening, standing over a pot of decoction. She would stir it, her lips silently counting out the proportions. He would sit down beside her and say nothing. Heron didn't rush him. Sometimes she would hand him a cup of hot tea, silently, without words. The warmth of her hands through the clay of the cup, that was enough. At the end of the 5th month, the Duke's reply arrived. Shea brought a sealed tube. Rayon opened it in front of everyone. In the square in front of the hunting lodge, Sola read aloud, a charter. The Duke grants the village of Tool the right to use the crown lands of the forbidden forest of Chongrim within a day's journey of the village border. The tax is 1/10 of the income, to be paid directly to the duchy's treasury, bypassing the Baron. The Duke's seal, the Chancellor's signature, that was all. Rayon stood with the charter in his hands, silence all around. Then Shui tapped his stick on the ground, once, loudly, and said it all. Now the forest is ours. The village erupted. They shouted. They hugged each other. They cried. Grandma Ohm sat down on the ground and wailed that she had lived to see this day. Rayon's mother stood with Minsu in her arms, smiling so brightly her face glowed. Minsu shouted that they had won, though she didn't quite understand who. Nari stood next to Rayon and said nothing, shoulder to shoulder. Then she quietly said that her father had dreamed of this, of a free forest for free hunters. Rayon looked at her. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were shining. Saya stood on the other side. She was counting in her head, already figuring out how trade routes would change, what new goods could be added, what contracts to sign. A merchant's mind never stopped. Heron approached and handed Rayon a cup of herbal tea, hot, herbal. She said he hadn't eaten since morning. Rayon took the cup, and for the first time in 5 months, felt that the ground beneath his feet was solid. It wasn't swaying. It wasn't slipping away. Solid. He stood there. He held the charter, and he knew that the real work was just beginning. The Baron wouldn't accept this. A charter is just a piece of paper. Paper protects you from the law, not from a club. The Baron's response came a week later. Not a club, worse, a trade blockade. C's caravan stopped crossing the bridge over the Tunne River, the only bridge, the only road to the capital. The Baron had set up a checkpoint on the bridge, his own men, inspecting goods, a toll for passage, triple the usual rate. C returned from the first convoy red with rage. She said she'd paid so much that her profit had been wiped out. Rayon listened. He thought, the bridge, the only bridge. The Baron knows this. He controls the road and controls trade. The Duke's charter does not forbid the Baron from setting up a checkpoint on his bridge. The bridge is on the Baron's land. It is his right. Rayon went to the bridge, alone. He looked, wooden, old, spanning the river in a narrow, narrow spot. The banks are steep. The river is full in the spring, deep. The ford is far away, 10 versts upstream, impassable for a caravan. He returned and gathered a council. Nari, Saya, Sola, Harin, Cho, Kim. He said there were 2 ways. First, build their own bridge, downstream, on crown land, where the Baron has no authority. Expensive, time-consuming, but permanent. Second, negotiate with the Baron, quick, but unreliable. Saya said that the bridge would require gold, which they didn't have. Sola said that a bridge on crown land would require another charter, months of waiting. Nari said they could just burn down the outpost. Everyone looked at her. She shrugged. Chui coughed and said there was a third way. The river, rafts. Downstream, the river flows into the main river. It's 2 days down the main river to Gyeongwon. No supply train needed. No bridge needed. The Baron can sit at the outpost until winter. Rayon looked at the old man. He smiled. For the first time in a week. Rafts. The Duke's charter granted Toul the right to the forest lands of Cheongrim. The village doubled in size. The Baron responded with a trade blockade across the only bridge. Rayon convened a council, and Che proposed a detour. Rafts down the river to Gyeongwon, bypassing the Baron. Haedin opened a pharmacy. The village became a town. The rafts were built over 10 days. Rayon designed them. Kim forged the staples. Taegu tied them together. Dongho and Junho chopped the logs. Boys from neighboring villages helped for silver. 3 rafts, wide, stable, with sides for cargo. The craftsman's hand made every joint stronger than it had any right to be. The logs were fitted so tightly that not even a needle could pass between them. Saya calculated the load capacity. Harin treated the wood with a mixture of pine resin and wax, against rot, against water. The rafts were ready by the middle of the 6th month. The first trip went smoothly. Saya led the convoy across the water. 2 rafts carrying goods, the third, empty, for the return trip. The current carried them along, oars for steering. 2 days to Gyeongwon. The Baron, with his outpost on the bridge, found out a week later. Rayon could picture his face when the steward reported that the convoys from Toul were no longer crossing the bridge. They were traveling by water, right past it, as if the bridge didn't exist. Money flowed like a river, literally. Saya opened a trading post in Gyeongwon. She rented a space. She hired a clerk. Hides from Toul went to 3 tanneries. Alchemists bought up the bones and fangs. Innkeepers and healers took the meat and herbs. Blacksmith Kim's knives became famous. Orders poured in. Taegu baskets were sold as handicrafts. By the fall of Toul's first year, the place was unrecognizable. 30 houses, a market in the square in front of the hunting lodge, a tanning yard, an expanded smokehouse for 10 carcasses, a furrier's workshop with 3 workers, Heron's pharmacy, Sia's office, Kim's blacksmith shop, a carpenter's workshop. Young people were returning from the city, not to be farmhands, to work, for silver, at home. Rayon turned 13. His body was growing slowly but surely. His shoulders were slightly broader, his arms slightly stronger. He began to draw the training bow that Nari had carved for him from ash wood, weak, childish, but a bow nonetheless. Nari stood behind him and adjusted his elbow. She said that in 6 months she would switch him to a real one. Rayon had his doubts. Nari never doubted it. It was then that he did for her what he had been putting off for 3 months. Reading the forest had led him along Nari's father's roots from the very first weeks. Old notches on the trunks, faded marks, trails that had grown over but hadn't completely disappeared. He followed them as if they were a map, day after day. Every trip into the forest added a piece. The turn at the split oak, the descent to the ravine with black stones, the climb to the ridge where only fir trees grow. Trailsman Cha Mughul's route led northwest, in the direction from which the shadow wolves came, toward the dead zone. Rayon took his time. He went bit by bit, and at the end of summer, he found it, the place of death. A pile of 3 fallen pine trees, old, 3 years old. Moss had covered the trunks, grass had sprouted between the branches. Bones lay beneath the pile, human bones. Rayon sat down nearby and stayed there for a long time. Chaka Mughal, the tracker, Nari's father. He came here 3 years ago and never returned. The trees fell on him. It wasn't the forest that killed him. Time. Rot. The rotten trunks collapsed at the wrong moment. Next to the bones lay a bow, intact, sturdy. The wood had darkened from the damp, but hadn't rotted. The bowstring had decayed, but the bow was intact. Rayon picked it up. Heavy. Long. A tracker's war bow. He brought it home and worked on it for 3 days. He cleaned it, dried it. He rubbed it with oil. He polished the grip until it shone. Then he wove a new bowstring from deer sinew, thin, strong. The craftsman's hand put just enough into each loop that the bowstring rang out when he pulled it taut to test it. A clear, high-pitched sound, like a voice. The bow came to life in his hands. He called for Nari that evening. She came in with her usual sullen expression. She saw the bow on the table. She stopped in the doorway. Her face changed. Rayon saw a wave pass over it. Recognition, disbelief, pain, hope, all at once. Nari approached the table slowly, as if approaching something fragile. She took the bow in both hands, pressed it to her chest, closed her eyes. She recognized it. Of course she did. She had been searching for it for 3 years. Rayon said he had found the place, that her father lay beneath the rubble on the northwestern ridge, that the trees had fallen, that he hadn't suffered, that the bow was nearby, intact. Nari stood with the bow in her hands and said nothing. Then she opened her eyes. Wet, red. She was crying. For the first time in front of someone. For the first time in 3 years. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She just stood there, holding her father's bow. Rayon didn't move. He didn't comfort her. He didn't touch her. He stood beside her, in silence, because sometimes silence beside someone is more than any words. Nari wiped her face with her sleeve. She looked at him. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was firm. She said he was a disgusting little boy, that he had no right to make an older woman cry, that she wouldn't forgive him for this. Then she stepped forward and hugged him, tightly. The bow nestled between them, warm, alive, smelling of oil and the forest. Rayon stood motionless, his body small, her hands large, strong, trembling. He carefully raised his hands and placed them on her back. They stood like that for a long time. Minsu peeked through the door. She saw them. She left quietly. Then she returned with a blanket. She draped it over Nari's shoulders and ran away. From that day on, Nari shot her father's bow. The bowstring, woven by Rayon, sang with every shot. The arrows flew more accurately, further, stronger. The system amplified the bow through the string, her father's weapon in his daughter's hands, reborn by the hands of one who cares. Nari no longer went to the farmstead. She moved her things to Tool, to the house next to the Cho house. She didn't explain. She didn't discuss it. She just moved. Everyone understood. No one said a word. It was then that Sondahi arrived, at night, like Sola, in a torn dress, with a bruise on her cheek, with a knife at her belt, and with a note. 20 years old, Baron's son's illegitimate daughter, a servant in his house her whole life. She came and said the Baron was planning an attack, a real one, not 5 men, 30 mercenaries from the city, in 2 weeks. The Baron hired them with the gold he'd been hoarding all summer. He'd decided to burn Tool, not to subjugate it, to destroy it. Rayon took Dahi in, fed her, gave her a room. Solia treated the bruise. Heron gave her ointment. Nari silently placed a knife before her, a good one, from Kim's forge. She said the old one was junk. Dahi took the knife and looked at Nari. For the first time that night, something other than fear and anger appeared in her eyes. Surprise. That someone was giving rather than taking. Rayon called a council, the last one before the storm. 2 weeks, 30 mercenaries. Nari said they wouldn't stand a chance in open combat. Dahi said the city mercenaries were cheap and cowardly. They fought for money, not for a cause. If things got tough, they'd scatter. Rayon nodded. So things had to get tough. Not for Tool, for them. He spent 2 days alone in the forest. No traps, no knife. He walked and listened. The voice of the thicket led him deeper than usual, past familiar trails, past watering holes. There the trees stood thicker. The moss on the rocks glowed pale green. The air was thick, damp, and warm. Rayon stopped on the shore of a small lake, black water, still. Here the forest was older than anywhere else. He sat down and closed his eyes. He sensed the guardian, far below, a faint pulse, fading. He asked the forest not for strength, for the way. The forest answered. A path that hadn't been there before led him to a bend in the Toulne River, a steep bank on one side, a gentle slope on the other. The only road from the Baron's lands to Toul by land led straight here, a narrow path between the trees, and the plan took shape. Not a fight, a trap. 10 days of work, the whole village. Tegu set up tripwires and rope traps along the road. Donho and Junho dug pits, shallow ones, knee-deep, enough for a horse to stumble. Rayon felled trees along the road, creating a corridor too narrow for 30 people to turn around in. Nari found a position on the high bank with a view of the entire road. 30 arrows in her quiver. Not to kill, to scare. Hedin prepared smoke bombs from wet wormwood mixed with pine resin. Thick, acrid smoke. Tears, coughing, panic. Dahi knew the Baron's schedule, the route, the order of the column. She knew the Baron would ride alone in a carriage in the middle of the convoy. Baron Sun Gihun wanted to see Toul burn. They arrived 12 days later. Not 30 mercenaries, 22. The Baron had cut costs. A convoy of 6 wagons, mounted men in front, the carriage in the center, foot soldiers on either side. They entered the corridor like a thread through a needle. The first horse hit a pothole. It stopped. It limped. The convoy came to a halt. Rayon stepped out onto the road, alone, unarmed. A 13-year-old boy facing 22 armed men. The senior mercenary shouted, "Get out of the way!" Rayon didn't move. Baron Sun Gihun climbed out of the carriage. Fat, in an expensive cloak, soft voice, cold eyes. He looked at Rayon and smirked. He said the boy was either brave or foolish. Rayon replied that he had come to talk. The Baron laughed. He looked around, the forest, a narrow road, a pit ahead, the wagon train behind. He asked what there was to talk about. Rayon spoke of the bridge, of the outpost, of the Duke's letter, and of what would happen in a minute if the Baron refused to listen. The Baron narrowed his eyes. Rayon whistled. Nari fired. The first arrow struck the ground a step away from the Baron's boot. The second hit a tree above the senior mercenary's head. The third severed the reins of the lead horse. 3 arrows in 2 seconds. From his father's bow, the mercenary screamed. The horses reared up. Smoke billowed from behind the trees. Thick, white, acrid smoke. The boys in the ambush pounded on empty cauldrons and shouted so loudly that the echoes bounced between the tree trunks. In the smoke, it seemed as though there were 100 attackers. Dahi stood on the ridge and directed the smoke bombs. Tegu tugged at the tripwire ropes. The mercenaries fell. They stumbled. They screamed. The horses went wild. The panic lasted 3 minutes. When the smoke cleared, half the mercenaries lay in pits. 4 had become entangled in the tripwires. 6 had fled into the forest and disappeared. The horses scattered. The wagon train stood askew. The Baron stood by the carriage, pale and sweaty. His soft voice was gone. Rayon approached, close. He looked up from below. A boy and a fat Baron in an expensive cloak. The Baron reached into the carriage and pulled out a purse. Heavy, gold, a lot. He held it out, said, "Take it. 30 gold pieces. For the whole year. Just let me go." Rayon looked at the purse. 30 gold pieces. With this money he could build a second hunting lodge, buy horses, hire people. 30 gold pieces is a lot. He looked at the Baron, a fat face, sweaty. His eyes weren't cold anymore, frightened. His soft voice trembled. Rayon remembered how this man had sent a messenger with 3 copper coins for a week's haul, how he'd sent mercenaries with clubs, how he'd ordered the wormwood barrier destroyed so the wolves would come to the village, to the where Minsu sleeps. He said he has a mother, a sister, and 5 companions. He wouldn't be able to explain to them why he took the money. So no, the Baron looked at him and, for the first time in his life, didn't know what to say. The remaining mercenaries stood around. They had heard. The boy had turned down 30 gold pieces, not out of pride, out of honor. They exchanged glances. Some lowered their weapons, not because they were afraid, because it's shameful to fight someone who can't be bought. Rayon said the Baron had better leave. The roadblock on the bridge is being removed tomorrow. The caravans are passing freely. Toul pays the Duke's toll. The Baron pays his taxes. Everyone in their place. If the Baron tries this again, next time there will be no talking. There will be the forest, and the forest doesn't talk. The Baron left. The mercenaries slunk off after him. 6 of the lost ones emerged from the forest by morning, wet, dirty, unarmed. The forest didn't let them out right away. It held them, it frightened them, it let them go. The guard post on the bridge disappeared the next day. The Baron's men never appeared in Toul again. Dahi stood on the ridge and watched her father's carriage drive away. Her face was stony, her hands were clenched. Nari approached and stood beside her, silently, shoulder to shoulder. Dahi said she had waited for this her whole life. Nari replied that the waiting was over. Now it was time to work. Dahi looked at her, then at Toul below, at the houses, at the smoke from the smokehouse, at the people emerging from their shelters. For the first time in 20 years, she was home. A year had passed. Winter turned to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, and winter again, and spring again. Toul changed every day. The district didn't stop for a single day. After the Baron's retreat, the village breathed a sigh of relief, freely, without looking back, without fear that tomorrow they would come with clubs or swords, and people poured into this freedom. The first to arrive were young men from Kimchon, the village of the village head, Father Soul, 3 of them, then 5, then a whole family with a cartload of belongings. They all said the same thing. There's nothing to do there. There's work here. Rayon took them all in. He found a place for everyone. Some with their hands in the furrier's workshop, some with their feet on the hunting trails, some with their heads at Sia's, counting and recording. By that time, Don Ho had grown into a senior tracker, 14 years old, broad-shouldered, calm. He would go into the forest alone and return with a full bag. His snares worked no worse than Rayon's had in the early months. The gift of transmission had turned a cowardly boy into a hunter. Junho became a foreman, not by title, in practice. He commanded a crew of 5 young men in the logging camp. He cursed, he pushed them, but the work got done. Tegu was silent as always, but his workshop became second only to Kim's smithy in revenue. Baskets, crates, furniture. Tegu began making furniture. Chairs, tables, benches. Everything was smooth, sturdy, beautiful. Saya sold his work in the capital as art. Tegu didn't believe it. Rayon showed him the coins. The boy would blush and retreat to his room, but the next day he would do even better. By the middle of the 2nd year, Toul had become Toulison. It wasn't just that it had grown, it had been transformed. 60 houses, log towers at the corners of the expanded palisade, a market with carved counters made by Tegu, 3 smokehouses, a tanning yard with sheds and vats for tanning, a carpenter's workshop, Kim's smithy with 2 forges and an apprentice, Heron's apothecary with an annex for the seriously ill. There were 3 beds there, clean linens, a supply of herbs and ointments. Heron treated everyone, from Toulison, from neighboring villages, from the towns across the river. People walked to her for half a day. She saw everyone, quiet, patient. In the evening she collapsed from exhaustion. Rayon would find her asleep over a pot of decoction. He'd cover her with a blanket, move the pot off the fire, leave. Heron would wake up wrapped up and with hot decoction on the table. She didn't ask who, she knew. Sia's office occupied a separate building, 3 clerks, a warehouse, an archive with trade documents. Sia didn't just sell goods from Toulison. She was building a trading network, contracts with tanners in Gyeongwon, with alchemists at the Duke's court, with innkeepers along the main road, with armorers in the capital who bought Kim's knives for 5 silver pieces apiece. She worked until late at night, every evening. The candles in her office burned later than anyone else's. Rayon came by sometimes. He sat down next to her, watched her do the math, columns of numbers, income and expense columns, totals, forecasts. Xia muttered under her breath and didn't notice him. Then she did notice. She looked up. Her eyes were tired but alive. She said that if he'd come to bother her, he should at least bring some tea. Rayon brought it. He sat back down, shoulder to shoulder by a single candle, in silence. Sometimes she explained to him what she was calculating. He listened, not because he understood all the numbers, because she needed to talk about it out loud, and he knew how to listen. Sol's office, a small building next to the hunting lodge. That's where she taught the children. 15 students. Reading, writing, arithmetic, law, etiquette. Min-soo sat at the front desk, the best student. Sola said the girl picked things up faster than any child she'd ever seen. Min-soo wrote in neat handwriting. She did mental math. She knew 3 dialects. 9 years old, with a clear voice, quick, with a rabbit pelt on her shoulders. She ran around the hunting grounds and bossed everyone around. She called Nari Uni. Shea Uni, the merchant. Harin Uni was a healer. Sol Uni was a scribe. Dahi Uni was a warrior. One day, a merchant arrived from the capital. Min-soo met him at the gate. The merchant asked who she was. Min-soo replied that she was the Lord's sister. The merchant asked how many Oni she had. Min-soo started counting on her fingers and lost count. She said, "Many. My brother gathered them all." The merchant looked around the courtyard and didn't know what to say. The militia barracks stood by the north gate. Dahi was in command. 12 fighters, locals, trained. Nari taught them to shoot. Dahi taught them drill and close combat. She fought with a knife so skillfully that Raeon froze the first time he saw her training. Fast, precise, ruthless. The fury she had been building up for 20 years found an outlet. Not destructive, creative. She was defending. For the first time in her life, she had something to defend. Raeon was 14. His body had grown. He was drawing a bow. Not a training bow, a real one. Nari had switched him to a combat bow at the start of his 2nd year. He shot worse than she did, but he shot. She said he'd catch up in a year. Raeon knew he wouldn't. Nari shot as naturally as she breathed. You couldn't catch up to that. You could only admire it from afar. Rafts traveled down the river twice a week. Goods from Tolleson were known throughout half the duchy. The name had become a brand, a symbol. People spoke of hides from Tolleson, and that meant the best money could buy. The Duke sent an envoy in the fall of the 2nd year, an elderly official in fine clothes. He inspected Tolleson, the market, the workshops, the wife, the rafts. He requested a meeting with the head. Raeon received him in the hunting lodge. Solya to the right, Sia to the left, Nari by the door, Dahi by the window, Heron in the corner with tea for the guest. The envoy offered a knighthood, a title, land, a coat of arms. Raeon refused. The ambassador was surprised. Raeon said he wanted a charter for the forest lands, not usage, ownership. Tolleson and the adjacent lands of Chongrim, with the right to build, to trade, to hunt, to govern. No intermediaries, directly under the Duke. Sola handed the ambassador a folder, trade reports, tax payments, lists of residents, a map. 3 months of preparation. Every page was flawless. The ambassador leafed through it, his eyebrows rising. He left with the folder. The charter arrived 2 months later, in winter, with the Duke's seal. Tolleson, a city, their own land, their own rights. Yoon-hee was the first to know. Raeon brought the letter home and placed it on the table in front of her. Her mother read slowly. Solya had taught her to read in a year and a half. Yoon-hee ran her finger along the lines. Her lips moved. She finished reading. She raised her head. She looked at her son, a 14-year-old boy with the hands of a craftsman and the eyes of a grown man. Her son, who 2 years ago had stepped outside in holy boots with an axe and returned with 3 hairs. And now he stood before her with a letter of recommendation for the city. Yoon-hee stood up. She hugged him, tightly. For a long time, she said nothing. Words were unnecessary. Late autumn, the square in front of the hunting lodge. Raeon stood and watched as people gathered. All of Tolleson, from neighboring villages. Merchants from Gyeongwon, with whom Seiya had worked, had arrived. The carpenter who built the first rafts. The tanner who bought the first hides. They had not come out of duty, but of their own free will. Yoon-hee stood at the front, in a new dress, blue with white embroidery, the first new dress in years. Seiya had ordered it in the capital, in secret. Yoon-hee saw the dress that morning and cried for half an hour. Then she put it on and became beautiful, truly beautiful. Min-soo stood beside her, 9 years old, in a rabbit fur coat. The fur was soft and warm. Rayon had sewn it himself, every stitch, the hand of a craftsman. The coat would last for years. A small Christmas tree was embroidered on the sleeve. Minsu had asked for it herself. She said that Christmas trees were beautiful. Rayon had embroidered it. Old Cho was walking across the square, slowly. His leg always hurt, but he walked steadily. He carried a pillow in his outstretched arms. A crown lay on the pillow, wooden, made of juniper. The women of Tulasson had spent a week weaving it. Every juniper branch had been selected by Heron, dried, soaked in oil, bent and woven into a hoop. 6 gifts were woven into the weave. A shadow wolf's fang, white, sharp. Nari had obtained it herself, during the winter hunt. A lone wolf had strayed into the territory. Nari went out with her father's bow. 1 arrow, straight to the heart. She cut out the fang with a knife and brought it back in silence. She placed it on the table and left. A counting bead, round, made of black wood. C brought it from the capital, a bead from her father's old abacus, the only thing left of his trading house. C had kept it for 3 years, now she gave it away. Rabbit fur, a small piece, soft, white. Minsu cut it from her own fur coat, by herself, without asking permission. Rayon saw the hole in the sleeve and understood everything. He didn't scold her, he sewed it up. A dry stem of red ginseng, that very one. From the root Rayon had brought back from a 3-day trek through a blizzard. When Minsu was coughing up blood, Heron kept the stem, dried it. It became thin and red as a thread. Heron wove it into the crown with her own hands, silently, with her eyes closed. The Tulasson seal, small, carved from the white bone of a swamp boar. Solia made the sketch. Kim carved it, a fir tree against the moon, the symbol of the city on the edge of the forest. Solia set the seal into the crown like a stone in a setting, precisely, carefully, like everything she did. A knife, small, with a bone handle made from a boar's tusk. Dahi forged it herself. 3 days at the forge. Kim helped. Dahi wouldn't let him near it. She did it herself. The blade was thin, sharp, woven into the juniper branches, the tip pointing inward. Protection and a blade, just like Dahi herself. Chowi carried the crown across the square. People parted, quietly. No command, they just parted. The old man stood before Rayon. He looked down at him, then up at him, because the boy had grown. He was almost as tall as the old man. Chowi said he had carried many heavy burdens in his life, but this pillow was the heaviest of all, because the future rested upon it. Rayon dropped to one knee, not before the old man, not before the Duke's envoy standing to the side, before his mother. Yunhee approached. 1 step, another step. Her hands were trembling. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She took the crown from the pillow. It was light. The juniper smelled of the forest. She lifted it. She placed it on her son's head. The crown sat perfectly, warm, alive. The juniper branches gave slightly. The wolf's fang was cold against her temple. The bead was smooth. The fur was soft. The ginseng stem was thin and red. A bone seal. A knife with its blade pointing inward. 6 gifts. 6 women. 6 promises. Rayon stood up, slowly. The square was silent. Not a sound. Not a rustle. A silence in which you could hear the wind passing through the treetops of Chongrim far beyond the stockade. Yunhee stood before him, small, thin, in a new blue dress, with a wet face, with a smile worth all the letters from all the dukes in the world. Then a sound came from the forest, distant, low, lingering, the cry of a ghost deer. People froze. The old men turned pale. In their memory, the ghost deer cried only before disaster, before a plague, before a landslide, before an invasion of beasts. A second cry, closer, louder. A vibration ran through the ground, through the soles of their feet, through their bones. People clung to one another. Chue stood upright and listened. His face was calm. He understood. A third cry, very close. The treetops beyond the stockade swayed all at once, as if the forest had bowed. The leaves trembled and fell silent. Silence, but a different kind, not empty, full, like a breath before a word. Chue struck the ground with his staff, loudly, once. He said, "Do not be afraid." It was not a warning, it was an acknowledgement. The forest had acknowledged the Lord. The square was silent for another second, then it erupted. Shouts, tears, laughter, Blacksmith Kim raised his hammer and struck the anvil standing by the forge. It rang out like a bell. Donho and Junho shouted incoherently and slapped each other on the backs. Taegu was silent, but tears streamed down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. For the first time in front of others, Grandma Ohm sat on a bench and ate a pastry, calmly, like a person who knew it would always be this way. Minsu hung onto her brother. She wrapped her arms and legs around him. She clung to him. Rayon held her with one hand. With the other, he held his mother. Yoonhee pressed herself against his shoulder and cried out loud, without holding back. Nari stood 3 steps away, a bow on her back, her father's bow with its string. She looked at Rayon and smiled, not widely, just the corner of her mouth, but her eyes were burning. She spoke quietly so that only he could hear. "I'll shoot. You set the traps. We're one." Rayon nodded. Saya stood nearby with a birch bark notebook under her arm. Even now, she looked out at the square and counted the people. A habit. Then she stopped counting. She looked at Rayon. She took out loud what she had been thinking for 2 years. "I'll follow this man anywhere." No one argued. Heron approached, silently. She held out a cup of hot herbal tea, as always. Rayon took it. His hands were warm from the cup. Heron looked at him, and for the first time in 2 years, her face was open. Without a scarf, without fear, alive. She said the tea was for fatigue, that tomorrow would be a difficult day, that he hadn't eaten since morning, and that she was glad the forest had found him. Solya stood straight. Her back was straight. Her hands were folded. Her face was calm. She looked at the Duke's ambassador and tilted her head slightly. The ambassador tilted his in response. They understood each other without words. Here stands a city, a real one, with literacy, with rights, with a future. Daki stood at the barracks gate, her hand on the hilt of her knife. Not out of threat, out of habit. She looked out at the square, at the people shouting with joy, at the city that 2 years ago had been a filthy, dying village, at the boy in the wooden crown who had given her a job, a weapon, and a voice. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. For Dahi, it was like a scream. Rayon stood in the middle of the square with the crown on his head. People surrounded him. His city, his family, mother, sister, 5 partners. Each had found here what she was looking for. Nari found her father's bow and a partner. Saya found goods she wasn't ashamed of and a partner who didn't haggle over trifles. Hadin found a forest without fear and a calling. Sola found the right to choose. Dahi found a home. Minso found health and 5 unis. And he found what brought him here. Then the keeper spoke. Not a whisper, not a sensation. Words, strangers, old, endlessly weary. They did not come through his ears, through the roots, through the earth, through the soles of his boots and the bones of his legs and his spine and the back of his head, straight into his head. Successor, now listen. Rayon froze. The square was bustling all around him. People were celebrating, but he stood motionless and listened. The keeper's voice was like the creaking of old wood in the wind, slow, heavy. Every word came with difficulty. Beneath the roots, corruption. It's coming, from the depths, from the heart, not evil, a disease. I held it back, 200 years. I can't anymore. I'm falling asleep. We need someone who knows how to care. Not a warrior, not a mage, a father. I searched, in all worlds, I found you. You died, for other people's children, without thinking. We need someone like that. For the forest, for the city, for everything. The voice faded. Like the flame of a torch, it flickered and went out. But Rayon knew the guardian wasn't dead. He'd fallen asleep, deeper, waiting. Beneath the roots of Cheongrim, corruption grows. Beasts flee. The shadows are thickening. And someday soon, Rayon will have to go into the very heart of the forest. Not with a sword, with what he has. With the hands of a master. With his knowledge of the forest. With people behind him. With the care that the forest recognizes and trusts. But that will be later. Today he stands in the square of his city, a juniper wreath on his head, his mother by his side, his sister in his arms, 5 women who would follow him anywhere, the town he built from nothing, and the forest behind him, which for the first time in 200 years is not silent. Rayon raised his head. He looked at Cheongrim, a dark wall of trees against the evening sky. The treetops swayed, gently, like a nod. He answered, with a single word, out loud, so that only those standing nearby could hear. Nari, Sea, Herin, Sola, Dahi, his mother, Minsu. I'm listening. Nari looked at him, then at the forest, then at him again. She hadn't heard the guardian's voice, but she had heard his answer, and she understood, not with her mind, with something deeper. She took her father's bow from her shoulder and laid it at his feet, not on the ground, on the step of the hunting courtyard, like an oath. Saya placed a ledger next to it. Harin, a bundle of red ginseng. Sola, the seal of Tulasun. Dahi, a knife. Minso pulled a rabbit pelt from her shoulders and laid it on top. 6 items on the step, 6 women before him. Rayon looked at them, a 14-year-old boy in a wooden crown, with the eyes of a 36-year-old man who knows the value of every day and every person around him. He bent down, he picked up each item, he returned each one. Nari's bow, C's notebook, Heron's ginseng, Sol's seal, Dahi's knife. He draped Minsu's pelt back over her shoulders and adjusted it, because it was evening and cold, and because Rayon never takes, Rayon gives. He said he didn't need their oath. He needed them themselves. With the bow, with the notebook, with the herbs, with the seal, with the knife, with the hare's pelt, each in its place, each with what it does best. Ahead lay the forest, ahead lay a mystery, ahead lay work, and they would manage, because they had managed until now. The wind carried the scent of pine needles and wet earth from Chongrim and something ancient that had no name. Rion inhaled, exhaled, and went to the hunting lodge, to prepare for tomorrow, because tomorrow there will be new work, new walls, new traps, new people, and someday soon a trek into the heart of the forest. But first, dinner, because Minsu is hungry, and Mother hasn't eaten since lunch, and Hayden forgot to eat while tending her potions, and Nari never eats first, and Saya forgets about food when she's counting, and Sola only eats when reminded, and Dahi still hides bread under her pillow for a rainy day. Rayon went into the house. He lit the fire. He hung up the pot. He threw in the meat. He chopped the onions. He stirred. The house filled with the smell of food, and they came, one after another, just like that first evening 2 years ago, when he brought 3 hares and a pheasant, and they sat by the fire, and ate, and were silent, and it was warm, and the forest stood beyond the walls, and the forest waited, and Rayon knew he was ready.